I'm Sarah Mitchell, 32, and I'm standing in the marble foyer of my $10 million mansion in Beverly Hills. The same family who threw me out at 16, calling me worthless, a burden they couldn't afford, are now at my doorstep with suitcases and desperate smiles. My parents, my golden child brother, even my aunt who slammed the door in my face when I begged for help that cold October night. They've lost everything in Dad's failed business venture, and somehow they think I owe them shelter. What they don't know is that I've been playing this moment for 16 years. The scared, abandoned teenager they discarded is gone. But what I discovered about our family's real history will change everything for all of us. Through the ornate glass doors, I can see them huddled together like refugees from their own choices. Mom clutches that faded family photo from our last Christmas together, the one where I'm standing slightly apart from the group, already sensing I didn't quite belong. Dad's hair has gone completely gray, and his once proud shoulders now slump with defeat. My brother Marcus stands behind them, his college football trophies probably packed away in one of those beaten leather suitcases at their feet. The doorbell rings again, more insistent this time. I remember that sound from 16 years ago, when I stood on the other side of different doors, pressing it desperately, hoping someone would answer. No one ever did. "Sarah, please," Mom's voice carries through the glass. "We just need to talk." I almost laugh. Talk. As if words could bridge the chasm they created that October night when they decided I was too much trouble, too expensive, too different from their perfect vision of family. I was failing math, sure, but I was also working 2 part-time jobs to help with household expenses. I was quiet, introspective, nothing like golden boy Marcus with his sports scholarships and effortless charm. "You're 16, Dad had said, his voice eerily calm. "Old enough to figure things out on your own." Mom had cried crocodile tears. I realize now, but she hadn't stopped him. She'd actually packed my bag, folding my clothes with the same care. She'd shown when I was leaving for summer camp. Except this time, there was no return date. "Sarah?" Marcus's voice now, deeper than I remember. "Come on, sis. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Sis, the word hits me like a physical blow. He hadn't called me that since we were children, before he learned that being associated with me might dim his own shine. I remember the way he'd walk past me in the hallway at school, pretending not to see me, embarrassed by his weird little sister who read too much and said too little. I opened the door. The years have not been kind to them. Dad's face is etched with lines that speak of sleepless nights and failed deals. Mom's once perfect manicure is chipped, her designer clothes wrinkled from what was probably a long drive. But it's Marcus who shocks me most. The confident athlete I once knew has been replaced by a man who can't quite meet my eyes. "Sarah," Mom breathes, and for a moment, I see a flicker of the woman who used to read me bedtime stories. "Look at you. You're so successful?" I finish for her. Yes, imagine that. The mansion's foyer stretches behind me, all Italian marble and crystal chandeliers. I've worked hard to make this place a home, but right now it feels like a fortress. The security system blinks steadily in the corner, a reminder that I now have the power to keep people out or let them in. "We heard about your business," Dad says carefully. "The tech company, we're proud of you." Proud. The word tastes bitter. In my mouth, where was their pride when I was sleeping in my car, showering at the gym, saving every penny to put myself through community college? Where was their pride when I was building my first website at the public library, dreaming of something bigger than their small-minded expectations? "What do you want?" I ask, though I already know. I've been tracking their financial decline for months, watching their world crumble from my penthouse office. Knowledge is power, and I've learned to hoard both. "We need help," Mom whispers. "The business failed. We lost the house. We have nowhere else to go." The irony isn't lost on me. 16 years ago, I was the one with nowhere to go. Now they're the ones standing at my door, begging for mercy from the child they threw away. I step aside, gesturing them into my home. But as they file past me, clutching their shabby luggage, I make a silent promise to the 16-year-old girl. who cried herself to sleep on park benches. This time I hold all the cards, and I intend to play them very, very carefully. Marcus sets his suitcase down with a heavy thud that echoes through the foyer. I watch him take in the surroundings, the original Picasso sketch on the wall, the handcrafted furniture, the view of the infinity pool through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His jaw tightens with something I recognize as envy mixed with disbelief. "Nice place," he says, "but there's no warmth in it. Must be nice to have money to throw around." I remember his college trophy case back home filled with gleaming reminders of his athletic achievements. Football, basketball, track. Marcus had been good at everything that mattered to our parents. Every Friday night, they'd sit in the bleachers cheering his name while I stayed home, supposedly studying but really just existing in the shadow of their golden child. "It is nice," I agree, refusing to take the bait. "Hard work tends to pay off." He snorts. "Right, like you worked harder than the rest of us." The accusation hangs in the air between us. This is classic Marcus deflecting his own failures by diminishing others' successes. I remember him doing the same thing in high school when I'd aced a test he'd failed, claiming the teacher liked me better or that I'd cheated somehow. How did Dad's business fail? I ask, though I already know the answer. I've read the bankruptcy filings, the lawsuit documents, the newspaper articles about Mitchell Construction's spectacular collapse. Dad clears his throat uncomfortably. Bad investments. The housing market shift. We got caught holding too much. Debt. What he doesn't say is that he'd gotten greedy, borrowing against everything to fund expansion projects that never materialized. What he doesn't mention is the gambling problem that started after Marcus's football career ended. The way he tried to recapture the thrill of victory through poker games and sports betting. "And now you're here," I state. "We're family," Mom says, as if that word still holds the same meaning it did before they abandoned me. Family helps family. I turn to Marcus, curious about his perspective. "What about you? Last I heard, you were working for Dad's company." His face flushes red. "I was learning the business. I was going to take over eventually." "But you're not qualified to run a construction company." I point out gently. "Your degree is in communications." "I was learning on the job," he snaps. "Not everyone needs to be a tech genius to be successful." It is the resentment that's been simmering beneath the surface. Marcus had always been the favorite because he was easy to understand. Athletic, popular, conventionally successful. I was the complicated one, the one who asked too many questions and didn't fit their narrow definition of achievement. "You're right," I say, "but you do need to be competent. And from what I understand, you made some pretty significant mistakes." The color drains from his face. He knows I know about the project he'd mismanaged, the safety violations that had resulted in hefty fines, the client relationships he'd damaged with his arrogance and incompetence. "How would you know about that?" He asks. "I know a lot of things." I reply, "I've been watching from afar." The admission seems to unsettle all of them. They'd assumed I'd disappeared completely after they kicked me out, that I'd either failed spectacularly or simply ceased to exist in their world. They never considered that I might have been building something bigger than they could imagine, while simultaneously keeping tabs on their slow decline. "Why?" Mom asks. "Why were you watching us?" I consider the question. Why had I hired a private investigator to track their lives? Why had I read every article about Dad's business troubles? Why had I felt a strange satisfaction watching Marcus's entitled dreams crumble? Because I needed to understand. I say finally, I needed to know if you ever regretted what you did to me. The silence stretches between us. Marcus shifts uncomfortably, and I see something flicker across his face, not quite guilt, but maybe the beginning of awareness. "Sarah," Dad starts, but I hold up a hand. "Did you?" I press. "Did any of you ever wonder what happened to me? Did you ever think maybe you made a mistake?" Marcus looks at the floor. "We thought you'd be fine. You were always smart, always independent." "I was 16, I remind him. "I was a child." "You were different," he says quietly. "You never seemed to need us the way you needed them." I finish. The way you needed their approval, their attention, their constant validation. He flinches, and I realize I've hit a nerve. Marcus had lived his entire life seeking their approval, measuring his worth by their reactions to his achievements. When the achievements stopped coming, when age and injury ended his athletic career, he'd been left floundering just as much as I'd been. The difference is, I had learned to stand on my own. Marcus had never learned to exist without their support. This is what we're going to do, I announce, my voice taking on the authoritative tone I use in boardrooms. You can stay here temporarily while you figure out your next steps. But this isn't a permanent solution, and it's not charity. You're going to contribute to this household, and you're going to follow my rules. I can see the protest forming on Marcus's lips, but Mom places a warning hand on his arm. We're grateful, she says. Whatever you need us to do, we'll start with unpacking, I say. The guest wing is down the hall. You'll find everything you need there. As they gather their belongings, I watch Marcus struggle with the reality of his situation. The golden child, reduced to accepting help from the sister he'd always considered inferior. The irony is almost too perfect. But as I watch him, I feel something unexpected, not satisfaction, but a strange kind of sadness. We'd both been damaged by our parents' favoritism, just in different ways. He'd been raised to believe he was special, untouchable, destined for greatness. I'd been raised to believe I was invisible, expendable, lucky to be tolerated. Now here we are, both of us casualties of their limited capacity for love. The difference is, I'd learned to create my own worth. Marcus still didn't know how to exist. Without their validation, maybe, I think as I watch him disappear down the hallway, that's something I can teach him. But first, he's going to have to learn what it means to be humble, and I'm going to make sure he gets a very thorough education. Once the men have disappeared into the guest wing, Mom lingers in the foyer. She's clutching her pearl necklace, the one Grandma left her, the one she used to wear to every important family event. I remember how she'd touch it when she was nervous, rolling the smooth beads between her fingers like a rosary. Sarah, she begins, her voice taking on that familiar tone I remember from childhood. Soft, pleading, designed to make me feel guilty for whatever boundary I was trying to establish. I know this is difficult. I know you're angry. I don't respond immediately. Instead, I study her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse. What I see instead is calculation. She's trying to figure out the best approach to get what she wants, my forgiveness, my support, my resources. You don't know anything about what I'm feeling, I tell her. She steps closer and I catch a whiff of her perfume. It's different now, cheaper, less sophisticated than the Chanel she used to wear. Everything about her has been downgraded, diminished by their financial fall. I'm your mother, she says, as if that title grants her automatic access to my thoughts and feelings. I know I made mistakes. Mistakes? I interrupt. You call abandoning your 16-year-old daughter a mistake? Her fingers work faster at the pearls. We were going through a difficult time. Your father's business was struggling even then. You thought I'd be easier to dispose of than Marcus. The words hang between us, sharp and undeniable. She opens her mouth to protest, but I continue. Don't pretend it was about money. You found a way to keep paying for Marcus's sports camps, his college applications, his car insurance. You found money for everything that mattered to you. That's not fair, she whispers. Fair? I laugh, and the sound echoes off the marble walls. You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when I had to sleep in my car because my own family wouldn't take me in? Was it fair when I had to choose between buying food or paying for a shower at the gym? She flinches, but I'm not done. You know what was really unfair, Mom? It was loving you anyway. It was spending years wondering what I did wrong, what I could have done differently to make you choose me. Tears start to form in her eyes, and I recognize this tactic too. Mom had always been skilled at making herself the victim, at redirecting conversations away from her failures by making others feel guilty for confronting her. I never stopped loving you, she says, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she somehow produced from her purse. Not for a single day. But you stopped fighting for me, I point out. The moment things got difficult, you gave up on me. Your father thought, no, I cut her off. Don't you dare blame this on him. You were my mother. You were supposed to protect me, to choose me, to make sure I was safe. Instead, you packed my bags and helped him throw me away. The tissue in her hand is shredded now. I was trying to hold the family together. I was trying to save our marriage. By sacrificing your daughter? By making an impossible choice, she snaps, and for a moment, I see a flash of the real anger underneath her victim act. You don't understand what it was like. The pressure, the financial stress, the constant fighting. Something had to give, and that something was me. She deflates slightly, realizing she's revealed more than she intended. I thought you were strong enough to handle it. You were always so independent, so self-reliant. Marcus needed us more. There it is, the truth she's been dancing around. In her mind, my independence wasn't a strength to be celebrated, but a reason to deprive me of the support I needed. Because I didn't fall apart when they ignored me, they assumed I didn't need their attention. Because I found ways to cope with their emotional neglect, they decided I didn't deserve their love. I was independent because I had to be, I explain. Because you never gave me the choice to be anything else. I know that now, she says quickly. I see how wrong we were. But Sarah, you've done so well for yourself. Look at this beautiful home, your successful business. Maybe it all worked out for the best. I stare at her, genuinely shocked by the audacity of her statement. She's trying to reframe my abandonment as a favor, my trauma as a gift that led to my success. You think my success justifies what you did to me? I think God works in mysterious ways, she says, falling back on the religious platitudes she'd always used to avoid taking responsibility. Maybe this was all part of his plan. God's plan? I repeat, or maybe, just maybe I succeeded in spite of what you did to me, not because of it. She starts to respond, but I hold up a hand. Let me be very clear about something, Mom. I didn't build this life to prove you wrong, though I'll admit there's some satisfaction in that. I built it to prove to myself that I was worth more than how you treated me, that I deserved better than what you gave me. And you do, she says quickly. You deserve everything you've achieved. I also deserve parents who didn't abandon me when life got complicated. The words settle between us like a judgment. She looks around the foyer, taking in the evidence of my success, and I can see her calculating. She's trying to figure out how to leverage my achievements to get what she wants. We can't change the past, she says finally, but we can try to build a better future. We can be a family again, can we? I ask. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're only interested in being family now that you need something from me. That's not true. She protests, but her voice lacks conviction. When was the last time you tried to contact me? Before you lost your house? Before Dad's business failed? When did you last reach out to see how I was doing? She doesn't answer because we both know the truth. She'd only sought me out when she had nowhere else to turn. I followed your life, she says quietly. I read articles about your company online. I was proud of you. But you never told me that. I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. It's a convenient excuse, but I suspect the real reason is simpler. She hadn't wanted to risk me rejecting her when she didn't need anything from me. It was easier to love me from a distance, to take pride in my achievements without having to confront the damage she caused. Here's what's going to happen, I say, my voice taking on the business-like tone I use when negotiating contracts. You can stay here while you figure out your next move. But I'm not going to pretend that your presence in my home means we're suddenly a happy family again. You're going to have to earn your way back into my life. What do you want from me? I want you to start telling the truth about why you really abandoned me, about what you thought would happen to me, about whether you ever even once regretted your decision. She nods slowly, but I can see the resistance in her eyes. She's hoping this is temporary, that she can weather this storm and things will go back to normal. What she doesn't understand is that normal was never acceptable to me. And Mom? I add as she starts to turn away. If you try to manipulate me the way you did when I was a child, I will ask you to leave. I'm not that powerless little girl anymore. She pauses, her hand on the pearl necklace, and for a moment I think she might actually acknowledge what I've sighed. Instead, she simply nods and walks away, leaving me alone with the echoes of our conversation as I watch her disappear down the hallway. I realize that some patterns are harder to break than others, but I also realize that I have the power to refuse to participate in them. That, perhaps, is the most important lesson I've learned in my 16 years of independence. I can't control how others treat me, but I can control how I respond, and I'm done being the victim of their choices. That night, I sit in my home office overlooking the city lights, but my mind travels back 16 years to a different October evening. I pull out the small leather diary I've kept hidden in my desk drawer, the one I'd managed to grab before they threw me out. Its pages are filled with the careful handwriting of a 16-year-old girl, trying to make sense of her world falling apart. October 15th, the entry I'd written that morning, not knowing it would be my last day in the house I called home for. 16 years. Dad's been in his office all day with the door closed. Mom keeps making phone calls and hanging up when I walk by. Marcus has been weird all week, won't even look at me. Something's wrong, but no one will tell me what, I'd sensed. The tension for weeks. Hushed conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Bills scattered across the kitchen table that Mom would quickly shuffle away. Phone calls that made Dad's face turn red and his voice rise to dangerous levels. The family meeting had been called for after dinner. "We need to talk," Dad had said, his voice carrying a finality that made my stomach drop. Even Marcus had looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair like he wanted to be anywhere else. I'd expected news about the business. Maybe that we'd have to move to a smaller house or cut back on expenses. I'd been prepared to offer to work more. Hours at my after-school job, to help however I could. I hadn't been prepared for what actually happened. "Sarah," Dad had begun, his hands folded on the table like he was conducting a business meeting. "You're 16 now. Old enough to understand when difficult decisions need to be made." Mom had been crying before he'd even finished speaking. Not the angry tears of an argument, but the resigned tears of someone who'd already accepted the inevitable. "What's going on?" I'd asked, though some part of me already knew. "The business is in trouble," Dad had continued. "We're facing some financial challenges, and we need to make some changes. I can work more hours," I offered immediately. "I can drop out of the drama club, pick up more shifts at the grocery store." "That's not enough," he'd said, and something in his tone had made me look at Marcus. My brother had been staring at his hands, his face flushed with what I thought was embarrassment about our financial situation. "What do you mean?" I'd pressed. "We can't afford to support you anymore," Mom had whispered. "We've tried to find another way, but what about Marcus?" I'd interrupted. "What about his college applications, his sports camps?" "Marcus has scholarship opportunities," Dad had explained. "He has a future that we need to protect." The words had hit me like a physical blow. I'd sat there, processing what they were telling me. They were choosing Marcus over me. They were deciding that his future was worth protecting and mine wasn't. Where am I supposed to go? I'd asked. "You're resourceful," Dad had said. You'll figure something out. You'll figure something out." As if 16 years of being my father meant nothing. As if I was just another business expense to be cut. I'd looked at Marcus, hoping for some sign of support, some indication that he would fight for me. Instead, he'd mumbled something about it being temporary and for the best. "How long have you been planning this?" I'd asked. The silence had been answer enough. They'd given me 30 minutes to pack. 30 minutes to gather 16 years of life into a single duffel bag. I grabbed clothes, a few books, and this diary. I'd left behind photo albums, school, awards, the stuffed elephant I'd had since I was 5, everything that connected me to the life I thought was mine. Mom had driven me to the bus station. She cried the entire way, but she hadn't changed her mind. She'd bought me a ticket to downtown and pressed $40 into my hand. "This is temporary," she'd said. "Once things get better—" "No," I'd interrupted. "This is permanent." "You're making sure of that." She'd tried to hug me, but I'd pulled away. I'd walked into that bus station alone, carrying everything I owned in a bag that wasn't even completely full. The first night had been the hardest. I'd found a 24-hour diner and nursed a cup of coffee until dawn, trying to figure out what to do next. The manager had finally asked me to leave, not unkindly, but firmly. I'd walked the streets for hours, looking for help, for someone who might take me in. I'd called my Aunt Susan mom's sister from a payphone. "I'm sorry, honey," she'd said, after I'd explained the situation. "But your parents must have had their reasons. I can't go against their decision." She'd hung up before I could respond. I tried 2 more relatives, friends' parents, even my guidance counselor's emergency number. Everyone had the same response. This was a family matter. They couldn't get involved. I should work it out with my parents. But there was nothing to work out. My parents had made their choice, and I was on my own. The homeless shelter had been a revelation. I'd expected judgment, but instead I'd found a community of people who'd been discarded by their families, their jobs, their communities. They'd taught me how to survive, where to find free meals, how to stay safe, which places would let you rest without asking for money. Mrs. Rodriguez, the night manager, had been particularly kind. She helped me enroll in a different high school, one that would accept my situation without asking too many questions. She'd show me how to apply for jobs that would work around my school schedule. "You're not the first kid to end up here," she told me. "But you have something a lot of them don't. You're not angry at the world. You're angry at specific people, and that's harder to carry but easier to overcome." She'd been right. I've been angry at my parents, at Marcus, at the relatives who turned their backs on me. But I hadn't been angry at life itself. I'd still believed that I could build something better, that I could prove them wrong. It had taken me 3 years to save enough money for community college. 3 years of working multiple jobs, living in shared apartments with strangers, eating ramen noodles for dinner more nights than I care to remember. But I'd done it. I'd gotten my degree, then my bachelor's, then my master's in computer science. I'd started my first business at 25 with $1,000 and a laptop. I'd built it into a multi-million-dollar company by the time I was 30. I'd bought this house with cash, signed the deed with steady hands, and felt something I'd never experienced before. Security. But even success couldn't erase the memory of that October night. Even wealth couldn't fill the space left by there. Abandonment. Now, sitting in my office, I close the diary and look out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, other kids are being thrown away by families who find them inconvenient. Other 16-year-olds are learning that love is conditional. That family is a luxury they can't afford. I think about the foundation I've been planning, the shelter I want to build for kids like I was. I think about the letter I wrote to Mrs. Rodriguez last year, thanking her for saving my life, and the scholarship I've established in her name. My parents took 16 years of my life from me, but they also gave me something valuable, the knowledge that I could survive anything, that I could build something meaningful from nothing. Tomorrow, I'll start showing them exactly what their abandoned daughter has become. But tonight, I allow myself to grieve for that 16-year-old girl who just wanted her family to choose her. She deserved better than what they gave her. But she also deserved to see what she became despite their failures. And I hope she'd be proud of the woman she grew into. The homeless shelter bracelet sits in my desk drawer, a thin plastic band that had been my identification for 6 months. It's faded now, the writing barely legible, but I keep it as a reminder of how far I've come. Those first months after being thrown out were a masterclass in survival, taught by people society had forgotten, but who possessed wisdom I'd never learned in my comfortable suburban life. Mrs. Rodriguez had been the first to treat me like a human being rather than a problem to be solved. She'd worked the night shift at Harbor House, a transitional shelter for women and children. Unlike the emergency shelters that kicked you out every morning, Harbor House allowed you to stay for up to 6 months while you got back on your feet. First rule, she told me on my first night, is that this isn't rock bottom. This is just a stop on your journey. Don't get comfortable, but don't be ashamed either. I'd shared a room with Carmen, a woman in her 30s who'd fled an abusive marriage with her 2 young children. She'd been working as a hotel housekeeper during the day and studying for her GED at night. Her determination had been infectious. You're young, she told me. You have advantages I don't. Use them. The advantages hadn't felt like advantages at the time. Being 16 and homeless felt like being caught in a system designed for adults, with no safety net for someone my age. But Carmen had been right. I had energy, intelligence, and most importantly, time. I'd enrolled at Jefferson High School using the shelter's address. It was a rougher school than the one I'd attended before, but the guidance counselor, Mr. Peterson, had taken an interest in my situation. He'd helped me apply for a fee waiver for the SATs, and had connected me with a program that provided free tutoring. You're not the first kid to end up here, he'd said, echoing Mrs. Rodriguez's words. But you might be the first one with this. Much potential. Don't waste it. Work had been harder to find. Most employers didn't want to hire a 16-year-old with no permanent address. I finally found a job at a 24-hour diner, working the overnight shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The pay was terrible, but it meant I could go to school during the day and work at night. The customers at the diner had been a mix of shift workers, insomniacs, and people who, like me, existed on the margins of society. There was Tommy, a veteran who came in every night at 2 a.m. for coffee and pie, who taught me how to spot trouble before it found me. There was Elena, a nurse who worked the night shift at the hospital, who'd slip me leftover sandwiches from the staff cafeteria. You remind me of my daughter, she'd said one night, watching me study chemistry between orders. She's away at college. I wish I could help more. You're helping enough, I told her, and I'd meant it. These small kindnesses from strangers had sustained me when my own family had abandoned me. The hardest part hadn't been the physical challenges, the exhaustion, the hunger, the constant uncertainty. It had been the emotional isolation. I'd watch other kids my age complaining about curfews and chores, and I'd want to scream that they had no idea how good they had it. I'd started keeping a journal during those months, writing letters to my parents that I'd never send. Letters full of hurt and anger, but also updates on my life. I'd tell them about getting an A on my calculus test, about the college applications I was working on, about the dreams I was building despite their abandonment. Dear Mom, I'd written, one night after a particularly difficult shift. I got accepted to 3 colleges today, full scholarships to all of them. I wish I had someone to tell who would be proud of me. By spring, I'd saved enough money to move into a shared apartment with 2 other girls. It wasn't much a converted garage that we divided into 3 small spaces with hanging sheets, but it was mine. I'd never been so proud of anything in my life. The apartment had been near the beach, and I developed a routine of walking along the shore before school. The sound of the waves had become my therapy, a place where I could process the emotions I couldn't afford to feel during the day. One morning, I met an older woman named Margaret who walked her dog at the same time every day. She'd been a retired teacher, and she'd started bringing me books, novels, poetry, philosophy. She'd never asked about my living situation, but she'd seemed to understand that I needed more than just survival. Education is the great equalizer, she told me, but wisdom that comes from surviving things that would break other people. She'd been right. The girl who'd been thrown out by her family had learned things that couldn't be taught in any classroom. I'd learned how to read people, how to spot opportunity, how to build something from nothing. Most importantly, I'd learned that my worth wasn't dependent on other people's opinions of me. The day I graduated from high school, I'd sat in the audience alone. No family, no friends from my old life, just me, celebrating an achievement. That felt monumental. Mrs. Rodriguez had come, bringing flowers and a card that said, "I always knew you'd make it." That summer, I'd worked 3 jobs to save money for community college. I'd been a waitress at a breakfast place, a retail clerk at a clothing store, and a weekend babysitter for a family whose kids I'd grown to love. Every dollar I'd earned had gone into a college fund I kept hidden in a coffee can under my bed. Community college had been a revelation. I'd discovered computer programming in a basic IT class, and had fallen in love with the logic, the problem solving, the ability to create something from nothing but code. My professor, Dr. Williams, had encouraged me to transfer to a four-year university. "You have a gift," he'd said. "Don't waste it on small dreams." But I'd already learned that dreams had to be earned, not just wished for. I'd spent 2 years at community college excelling in every class, building a foundation that would support whatever came next. The transfer to UCLA had been the first time I felt like I was truly moving forward rather than just surviving. I'd earned a partial scholarship, but I'd still had to work to pay for living expenses. I found a job at a tech startup, doing basic coding work in exchange for practical experience. The startup had failed within 6 months, but I'd learned more about business in those 6 months than I had in 2 years of formal education. I'd seen how good ideas could fail due to poor execution, how personality conflicts could destroy promising ventures, how the right timing and connections could make all the difference by the time I graduated from UCLA. I'd already started my first business, a web design company that I'd run from my studio apartment. I'd reinvested every penny back into the business, living on ramen and determination. The first million had been the hardest. Every client had been precious, every project a chance to prove myself. I'd worked 8-hour days, taught myself advanced programming languages, and slowly built a reputation for delivering quality work on time and under budget. The second million had been easier. By then, I'd had a team, systems, and enough credibility to attract bigger clients. I moved into a real office, hired employees, and started to think about scaling the business. The third million had been when I'd finally felt safe enough to buy a house, safe enough to take risks, safe enough to start planning for the future rather than just surviving the present. Now, sitting in my Beverly Hills mansion, I fingered the faded shelter bracelet and remembered the girl who'd worn it. She'd been scared, angry, and alone. But she'd also been determined, resourceful, and unbroken. She'd survived not because she was special, but because she refused to let their abandonment define her worth. She built something beautiful from the wreckage of their rejection, and tomorrow she'd start showing them exactly what their throwaway daughter had become. The first business license I ever filed hangs framed in my office, a simple document that cost me $50 and changed my life forever. Mitchell Digital Solutions, I'd named it, partly out of spite, partly because I'd wanted to reclaim the family name they'd tried to take from me. I'd started the company at 25 with nothing but a laptop, a business plan scrawled on coffee-stained napkins, and the kind of desperate ambition that comes from having nothing left to lose. My first office had been the corner table at a 24-hour cafe, where I'd nurse a single coffee for hours. While building websites for local businesses, the breakthrough had come through Dr. Williams, my community college professor who'd become an unlikely mentor. He'd introduced me to James Chun, a successful entrepreneur who'd been looking for someone to revamp his struggling electronics store's online presence. "I like your hunger," James had said after I'd presented my proposal. "You remind me of myself when I was starting out. But I need to know you're not going to disappear when things get tough." "I've never had the luxury of giving up," I'd reply, and something in my tone had convinced him to take a chance on me. That first project had been a disaster and a triumph rolled into one. I had underestimated the complexity of integrating an e-commerce platform with their existing inventory system. What should have taken 2 weeks had stretched into 2 months. I'd worked around the clock, learning new programming languages on the fly, fixing problems I'd never encountered before. I'd lost money on the project, but gained something more valuable, experience and a reputation for never giving up. James had been so impressed with my persistence that he referred me to 3 other business owners. By the end of my first year, I'd had 12 clients and enough revenue to move into a small office. The office had been a converted storage unit in an industrial complex, no windows, and barely enough space for a desk and a filing cabinet, but it had been mine. I'd bought a used desk from a bankruptcy auction and spent my weekends painting the concrete walls white to make the space feel less like a bunker. My first employee had been Maria, a recent graduate from a coding boot camp who'd been struggling to find work. She'd been willing to work for equity instead of salary, which was all I could afford at the time. Together, we turned that cramped storage unit into a surprisingly productive workspace. "This is either going to be amazing or we're both going to end up living in our cars, Maria had joked on our first day. I've already lived in my car, I'd replied. This is definitely an upgrade. The real turning point had come when we landed. A contract with a mid-sized manufacturing company that needed a complete digital overhaul. Their previous web developer had vanished in the middle of the project, leaving them with a half-built system and a looming deadline for a major product launch. I quoted them a price that would triple our revenue if we delivered on time. Catch was that we'd have to complete 3 months of work in 6 weeks, working with code that someone else had written badly. Are you insane? Maria had asked when I told her about the timeline. Probably, I admitted. But this is our shot. If we pull this off, we're not just surviving anymore, we're competing. Those 6 weeks had been brutal. We'd worked 16-hour days, living on pizza and caffeine, debugging code that seemed designed to confuse. I'd slept on the office couch more nights than I'd gone home, but we delivered the project on time, and it had worked flawlessly. The client had been so impressed that they'd offered us a year-long maintenance contract and referred us to their parent company. Suddenly, we'd gone from scrambling for small projects to having more work than we could handle. That's when I met David Park, the investor who would change everything. He'd been looking for tech companies to add to his portfolio, and something about our scrappy operation had appealed to him. You're doing everything wrong, he told me after touring our upgraded office space. Your overhead is too low, your profit margins are too thin, and you're trying to do everything yourself. Thanks for the pep talk, I'd replied, wondering why he'd asked to meet with me. But, he continued with a smile, you're solving real problems for real businesses, and your clients love you. That's rarer than you might think. David had offered to invest $200,000 in exchange for 20% of the company. It was the first time anyone had ever offered to bet real money on my potential. What do you want to build? He'd asked. I'd thought about all the businesses I'd worked with, all the problems I'd seen, all the inefficiencies that could be solved with better technology. I want to build the company that makes other companies better, I'd said. Not just websites, but complete digital solutions. Systems that help businesses grow, not just look pretty online. That's a big vision, he'd said. I've never been good at thinking small. The investment had allowed us to hire 5 more developers, move into a real office with windows, and start pursuing larger clients. We branded it as Mitchell Technologies and positioned ourselves as a full-service digital transformation company. The growth had been exponential. By year 3, we'd had 40 employees in offices in 3 cities. By year 5, we'd gone public, and I'd become a millionaire on paper. By year 7, we'd been acquired by a Fortune 500 company for $50 million. I'd kept a 20% stake in the company and stayed on as chief technology officer for 2 years, learning how large corporations operated. Then I cashed out my remaining shares and started my second company, this time with the advantage of experience and capital. The second company had been even more successful. We developed artificial intelligence solutions for healthcare providers, helping hospitals streamline their operations and improve patient outcomes. The technology had been revolutionary, the market had been hungry for innovation, and I built a team of brilliant people who shared my vision. When Google had offered to acquire us for $200 million, I'd said yes, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to see our technology reach as many people as possible. That's when I bought this house. Not as a symbol of success, but as a statement of permanence. I'd finally reached a place where I couldn't be thrown away, where I couldn't be discarded when things got difficult. The house had been more than I needed, but it had represented something important, security that no one could take away from me. Every room had been chosen deliberately, every piece of furniture selected with care. This wasn't just a house, it was proof that the girl that abandoned had built something lasting. I'd started my third company the following year, focusing on educational technology. Having been failed by traditional systems myself, I'd wanted to create tools that would help other kids who didn't fit the conventional mold. The company had specialized in adaptive learning platforms that adjusted to each student's pace and learning style. That company had been the most personally meaningful, even if it hadn't been the most profitable. We'd worked with underserved schools, homeless shelters, and community centers. I'd seen kids who reminded me of myself smart, motivated, but failed by systems that didn't understand their potential. 3 successful companies, 3 exits, 3 opportunities to prove that success wasn't just about money. It was about creating value, solving problems, and refusing to accept that things couldn't be better. Now at 32, I had more money than I could spend in several lifetimes, but more importantly, I had the knowledge that I'd earned every dollar through intelligence, persistence, and the kind of grit that only comes from having to survive on your own. The business license hanging on my wall was more than just a piece of paper. It was a declaration of independence. It was proof that I'd taken the pain of the rejection and transformed it into purpose. My parents had thrown away what they'd seen as a burden. But that burden had taught herself to carry weight that would have crushed someone who'd never learned. To be strong, tomorrow I'd start showing them exactly how much weight their discarded daughter could carry. The newspaper clipping is yellowed now, but the headline still stings. Local construction company faces bankruptcy after safety violations. I found the article online 3 years ago, part of my systematic monitoring of my family's downward spiral. I printed it not out of satisfaction, but as a reminder that their success had always been more fragile than they believed. I'd started tracking their lives about 5 years after I'd left, initially just to understand what happened to the family that had thrown me away. What I'd discovered was a pattern of poor decisions, mounting debt, and the slow erosion of everything they claimed was too important to risk on supporting me. Dad's construction company had been struggling, even before they kicked me out, though I hadn't known it at the time. The financial pressure that had made them see me as expendable had been the beginning of a much larger collapse. Without the foundation of sound business practices, the company had been built on borrowed time and borrowed money. The first major blow had come when Marcus was a junior in college. Dad had co-signed a massive loan to fund an expansion into commercial development, convinced that bigger projects would solve their cash flow problems. Instead, the expansion had spread their resources too thin, and they'd started cutting corners to meet deadlines. That's when the safety violations had begun. Minor infractions at first missing guardrails, inadequate protective equipment, rushing through inspections. But minor violations had led to major accidents, and major accidents had led to lawsuits they couldn't afford to fight. I'd read about each incident in local news reports, watching from afar as the company I'd grown up hearing about at dinner. Tables slowly destroyed itself. There had been a bitter irony in seeing them lose everything while claiming they'd abandoned a need to protect their future. Marcus had graduated from college just as the company's reputation was collapsing. His communications degree had prepared him for a career in marketing or public relations, but Dad had insisted he join the family business. Mitchell & Son Construction had always been Dad's dream, even when it was clear that Marcus had neither the interest nor the aptitude for the work. The newspaper articles from that period had painted a picture of a young man desperately trying to save a sinking ship with no real understanding of what was needed. Marcus had been quoted in several interviews, making promises about new leadership and modernizing operations. That had sounded more like campaign slogans than business strategy. "We're committed to rebuilding trust in the Mitchell name," he'd said in one article. I wondered if he'd thought about me when he'd said that the Mitchell, who'd been building her own reputation while he'd been destroying the family's. The gambling had started around that time, though I hadn't learned about it until much later. Dad had apparently developed a taste for poker games and sports betting, convinced that one big win would solve their financial problems. Instead, it had accelerated their decline, adding personal debt to the business obligations they couldn't meet. Mom had tried to hold things together in her own way. I'd found records of her taking out credit cards in her name, borrowing against their house, even selling her jewelry to keep the business afloat. The pearl necklace she'd been wearing when they'd arrived at my door was apparently the only piece she'd managed to keep. The irony hadn't been lost on me. They claimed they couldn't afford to support me, but they'd thrown good money after bad trying to save a business that had been failing for years. They'd chosen to sacrifice their daughter rather than face the reality of their situation. Final collapse had been swift and brutal. A construction accident had injured 3 workers. leading to an investigation that had uncovered years of safety violations and corner cutting. The resulting lawsuits had forced them into bankruptcy, and the state had revoked their construction license. I'd read about it in my office. Surrounded by the success I'd built while they'd been destroying everything they claimed was worth more than me. I'd felt a complex mix of emotion satisfaction that their abandonment of me hadn't saved them, sadness that they'd lost everything anyway, and a strange kind of relief that their financial situation finally matched their moral bankruptcy. The house had been the next to go. The beautiful suburban home where I'd grown up, where they'd held the family meeting that had ended my childhood, it had been foreclosed on 18 months ago. I'd driven by it once, seeing the sold sign in the yard, wondering if they'd thought about me when they'd packed their belongings. Marcus had tried to start his own consulting business, leveraging his family connections and college network. But in a small business community, reputation mattered, and the Mitchell name had become associated with failure and unsafe practices. His business had lasted 8 months before he'd been forced to close it. Dad had taken a job with a former competitor, working as a project manager for people who'd once been his peers. The man who'd built his identity around being the boss had been reduced to taking orders from others. I'd heard through the business community that he'd struggled with the transition, his pride making it difficult to accept direction from former equals. Mom had gone back to work for the first time in 20 years, taking a job as a receptionist at a dental office. The woman who'd once hosted elaborate dinner parties and served on charity boards had been reduced to scheduling appointments and answering phones. Through it all, I'd watched from a distance, building my own empire while theirs crumbled. I'd felt like a ghost haunting their decline present but unseen, aware of their every failure while they'd remained ignorant of my success. The strangest part had been how their struggles had motivated me. Every article about their failures had reminded me why I was working so hard, why I couldn't afford to take success for granted. They taught me that financial security was fragile, that reputation could be lost quickly, that family loyalty was conditional, but they'd also taught me something they'd never intended, that their opinion of my worth had never mattered. They'd thrown me away believing I would fail, and instead I'd built something they could never have imagined. Now, sitting in my office worth more than their entire construction company had ever been, I realized that their decline had been inevitable. They'd been playing a game they didn't understand, with resources they couldn't afford to lose. Guided by pride rather than wisdom, I'd learned to play a different game entirely. I'd built my success on competence rather than connections, on merit rather than manipulation. Most importantly, I'd learned that true security came from knowing I could rebuild anything I lost, not from clinging to things that had never been as stable as they'd appeared. Tomorrow, I'd start showing them the difference between their kind of success and mine. They'd lost everything because they'd never really understood what they'd had. I'd built everything because I'd started with nothing and learned to create value from void. The abandoned daughter had become everything they'd never been: sustainable, ethical, and genuinely successful. And now they'd have to live with the consequences of their choice every single day. The next morning, I find them in my kitchen, helping themselves to coffee and making breakfast as if they belong here. The sight stops me cold, not because I'm angry, but because of how naturally they've assumed ownership of my space. Even in their desperation, they still expect the world to accommodate them. Mom has found my expensive Italian coffee beans and is brewing a pot in my $1,000 espresso machine. Dad is reading the Wall Street Journal, my subscription, while eating toast made from my artisanal bread. Marcus is scrolling through his phone, probably using my Wi-Fi, acting like this is a hotel rather than a home I've graciously opened. To them, "Good morning," I say, my voice neutral but firm. They look up with the guilty expressions of children caught doing something they know they shouldn't. But instead of apologizing, they seem to be waiting for me to join their impromptu family breakfast. "Sarah," Mom says brightly, "I made extra coffee. Your machine is wonderful, so much better than what we had." "Had," I repeat, past tense. The reminder of their lost home hangs in the air between us. Dad clears his throat and folds the newspaper with deliberate precision. "We should talk about arrangements," he says in his businessman voice. expectations, timelines, that sort of thing. I pour myself a cup of coffee and lean against the counter, studying their faces. They're trying to establish a negotiation, as if this is a business transaction rather than a family crisis of their own making. Let's start with the basics, I say. How long were you planning to stay? They exchange glances that kind of loaded. Look that married couples use to communicate without words. It's Mom who answers, "We're not sure yet," until we can figure out our next steps. Which could be, "We're exploring options," Dad says vaguely. "Possibly relocating. Starting over somewhere new. With what money?" The question is blunt, but necessary. I've seen their financial records. I know exactly how dire their situation is. They have no savings, no retirement funds, no assets beyond the clothes they're wearing and the hope that I'll support them indefinitely. We're working on that. Marcus says, speaking up for the first time. I have some leads, potential opportunities. I almost smile at his optimism. Marcus has always believed that his charm and family connections would eventually pay off, even though both have proven remarkably unreliable. What kind of opportunities? I press. Consulting work. Project management. There are always companies looking for experienced construction professionals. Companies that will hire someone from a firm that went bankrupt due to safety violations. The question hits its mark. Marcus's face flushes, and Dad's jaw tightens with familiar anger. That wasn't our fault, Dad says. We were targeted by competitors who wanted to eliminate the competition. It's classic Dad rewriting history to cast himself as the victim rather than acknowledging his role in the company's failure. I've read the investigation reports. I know about the shortcuts, the ignored regulations, the workers who were injured because profit mattered more than safety. Interesting theory, I say. Is that what you're telling potential employers? We're telling them the truth, Mom says quickly, trying to diffuse the tension. Which version of the truth? I pull out my phone and scroll to the folder where I've saved articles about their company's collapse. Their faces go pale as I read the headline. Of the first article, Mitchell Construction cited for willful safety violations. That truth? Or maybe this one. Family business declares bankruptcy after worker injury lawsuit. The silence stretches between us. They're realizing that I haven't just been living my own life. For the past 16 years, I've been watching theirs fall apart. How do you know all this? Marcus asks. I make it my business to know things that matter, I reply. And whether you succeed or fail has always mattered to me, even when I wasn't supposed to matter to you. Dad's face is getting red, the warning sign I remember from childhood arguments. If you've been keeping track of us, then you know how hard we tried to save the business. How much we sacrificed. Sacrificed, I repeat. Like sacrificing your daughter? That's different, Mom says quickly. That was a family decision, made by some of the family, not all of it. I set down my coffee cup and pull out a manila folder I've prepared for this moment. Inside are copies of all the financial documents I've gathered over the year's bankruptcy filings, lawsuit settlements, foreclosure notices. I spread them across the kitchen island like evidence in a trial. Here's what I know, I say, my voice, taking on the professional tone I use in business meetings. Your company was failing before you kicked me out. You were already behind on payments, already cutting corners, already making the decisions that would eventually destroy everything. Business was tough, Dad admits grudgingly. Business is always tough. But instead of making the hard choices downsizing, pivoting, maybe swallowing your pride and asking for help, you chose to eliminate what you saw as unnecessary expenses. Me. You were costing us money, Marcus says defensively. Food, clothing, school supplies, college savings. College savings. That never existed, I interrupt. I've seen your financial records from that time. There was no college fund for me. There never had been. Mom looks stricken. We were planning to... No, you weren't. You were planning to pay for Marcus's college because his athletic scholarships didn't cover everything. You were planning to. Keep supporting him through his post-graduation job search. I was the expense you could eliminate without affecting anything you actually cared about. The words hang in the air like an accusation, because that's exactly what they are. We thought you'd be fine, Dad says, but his voice lacks conviction. You were always independent. I was independent because you made me independent. Because you never gave me the choice to depend on you the way Marcus did. I gather up the financial documents and slide them back into the folder. Here's what's going to happen, I continue. You can stay here for 30 days while you figure out your next steps. But this isn't charity and it's not family obligation. This is me choosing to help people who didn't choose to help me when I needed it. What does that mean? Mom asks. It means you're going to contribute to this household. Dad, you're going to handle maintenance and repairs. I have a list of projects that need attention. Mom, you're going to manage the household staff and help with my foundation's administrative work. Marcus, you're going to help with landscaping and pool maintenance. Their faces show a mixture of relief and indignation. They're grateful for the shelter, but they're struggling with the idea of working for me, of being employees rather than family. And I continue. We're going to have honest conversations about the past. No more rewriting history. No more playing victim. If you want to stay in my house, you're going to acknowledge what you did and take responsibility for the consequences. That's not fair, Marcus protests. We're not your servants. No, I agree. Servants get paid. You're getting room and board in a $10 million mansion while you figure out how to rebuild your lives. I'd say that's a pretty generous arrangement. Dad starts to object, but I hold up a hand. These are my terms. If you don't like them, the door is right behind you. But if you stay, you'll follow my rules and contribute to my household. Because unlike 16 years ago, this time I have the power to decide who gets to stay and who has to leave. The kitchen falls silent except for the hum of the espresso machine and the distant sound of traffic on the street below. They're processing the reality of their situation, that their abandoned daughter now holds all the cards. 30 days, I repeat. Use them wisely. I leave them sitting in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their failures and the reality of my success. For the first time in 16 years, they're completely dependent on someone else's generosity. The irony is perfect, but the satisfaction is more complex than I'd expected. This isn't just about revenge, it's about establishing the truth of what happened and who bears responsibility for it. They threw away their daughter to save themselves. Now they'll have to depend on that same daughter to survive. The lesson is just beginning. That afternoon, I find Marcus in the pool house, supposedly organizing the landscaping tools, but really just sitting on a bench staring at his phone. The private investigator's report sits in my office, save 200 pages of detailed findings about my family's life over the past 16 years. The information it contains would shatter what little pride they have left. But knowledge is power, and I've learned to wield both carefully. Enjoying your first day of manual labor? I ask, stepping into the cool shadows of the pool house. He looks up, startled, just figuring out what needs to be done. The pool filter needs cleaning. The deck furniture needs to be washed. And there are weeds in the flower beds. Unless you were planning to just sit here feeling sorry for yourself, his jaw tightens. This is humiliating, Sarah. We're family. Are we? I ask. Because family members don't usually have to earn the right to stay in each other's homes. I sit down across from him on a storage chest, studying his face. At 34, Marcus still has the bone structure that made him attractive in high school, but there's a softness around his edges that speaks of disappointment and too many easy choices. Do you know what I found most interesting when I started researching what happened to you all? I ask. You researched us? Extensively. I hired professionals. I wanted to understand how the family that threw me away for being a financial burden managed their finances after I was gone. His face goes pale. What do you mean professionals? Private investigators. The kind that can find court records, financial filings, employment histories. The kind that paint a very complete picture of someone's life. I pull out my phone and scroll to a photo I saved Marcus at a casino, taken just 6 months ago. His face in the image shows the intense concentration of someone betting money they can't afford to lose. Interesting hobby you've developed, I say, showing him the photo. The color drains from his face completely. Where did you get that? The same place I got the records of your gambling debts. Did you know that when someone files for bankruptcy, all their financial obligations become public record, including debts to casinos, loan sharks, and that particularly unpleasant gentleman who's been calling Dad's phone at all hours? Marcus stands up abruptly, pacing to the window. You don't understand. I was trying to help the family. I thought if I could win big enough, you could save the business that was failing because of your father's poor decisions and your complete incompetence. The words are harsh, but they're true. I've read the project management reports, the client complaints, the internal memos detailing Marcus's mistakes. He'd been put in charge of a major commercial development and had managed to alienate the client, go over budget, and deliver a product that barely met building codes. I was learning, he says defensively. You were 31 years old, Marcus. How much time did you need to learn how to read a blueprint? How to manage a timeline? How to communicate with clients without insulting them? Dad should have trained me better. Dad should have hired someone qualified instead of assuming his. Son could learn on the job at the company's expense. I stand up and move to the window beside him, looking out at the infinity pool that probably cost more than their entire house had been worth. Do you want to know what else I learned from my investigation? He doesn't respond, but I continue anyway. I learned that you've been telling people I'm dead. The words hit him like a physical blow. He turns to stare at me, his mouth opening and closing without sound. 3 different sources confirmed it. When people asked about your sister, remember, some people in town knew I existed. You told them I died in a car accident when I was 18. Sarah. It was easier than explaining that your family had thrown me out, wasn't it? Death is more socially acceptable than abandonment. People feel sorry for you when your sister dies. They ask uncomfortable questions when your parents kick her out. It wasn't like that, he says weakly. Then what was it like? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you found it easier to erase me completely than to admit what your family had done. I can see him struggling, trying to find words that will justify the unjustifiable. The Marcus I remember from childhood had always been good at talking his way out of trouble, but he's facing a situation where charm won't work. We thought you'd want a fresh start, he says finally, without the burden of our family problems. My family problems? I was 16 years old, Marcus. I didn't have problems, you were my problems. You know what I mean. Actually, I don't. Explain to me how pretending I was dead helped me have a fresh start. People would have asked questions if they knew you were on your own. This way, they just felt sorry for us and left it alone. The casual cruelty of it takes my breath away. They hadn't just abandoned me, they killed me in the minds of everyone who'd known our family. I'd become a tragic story that earned them sympathy instead of a living reminder of their failures. How long, I ask? What? How long did you tell people I was dead? Was it just the first few months, or have you been dining out on your dead sister's story for 16 years? His silence is answer enough. Unbelievable, I breathe. You've been receiving condolences for my imaginary death while I was building a life you couldn't even imagine. We didn't know you were successful, he says quietly. We thought you were probably struggling, maybe even actually dead. I finish. Would that have made it easier for you if your lie had become true? No, he says, but there's no conviction in his voice. I study his face, looking for signs of the brother I once knew, the boy who taught me to ride a bike and helped me build forts in the backyard. That person seems to have been replaced by someone. I don't recognize someone capable of erasing his own sister to avoid uncomfortable conversations. Here's what's going to happen, I say. You're going to call everyone you told about my death and correct the record. You're going to explain that I'm alive and successful and that you've been lying for 16 years. I can't do that. Why not? Because then they'll know what we did to you. They'll know we threw you out. Yes, I agree. They will, and you'll have to live with the consequences of their judgment, the same way I had to live with the consequences of your abandonment. Sarah, please. It would destroy what's left of our reputation. I almost laugh. Your reputation? Marcus, you've already destroyed your reputation. The business failed, you've been blacklisted from the construction industry, and you're living in your estranged sister's mansion because you have nowhere else to go. What reputation are you trying to protect? People don't know about the gambling, he says quietly. They will. Small towns have long memories and loose tongues. Eventually, someone will put the pieces together. I move toward the door, then pause. You have a choice to make, I tell him. You can keep living the lie and spend the next 30 days working for the sister you pretended was dead. Or you can start telling the truth and begin rebuilding an actual relationship with the sister who's very much alive and successful beyond your wildest dreams. And if I choose the truth, then maybe we can figure out how to be family again. But it has to start with honesty about what happened and who was responsible. I leave him alone with his choice, knowing that this is just the beginning. The truth has a way of demanding to be told, and I've learned that lies require more energy to maintain than honesty requires to live. My family threw me away and then erase me completely from their history. Now they'll have to decide whether they want to acknowledge the real me or continue living in the fiction they've created. Either way, I hold all the cards. And unlike them, I've learned how to play them with integrity. That evening, I sit in my study with the most damaging document from my investigation spread across my desk. The forged birth certificate is a masterpiece of deception officially issued, properly notarized, and completely fraudulent. It shows my birth date is 3 months later than my actual birthday. And more importantly, it lists Richard Mitchell as my biological father. But I have the real birth certificate too, the one that tells a very different story. I've known the truth for 2 years now, ever since my private investigator uncovered the records that my parents thought were buried forever. The revelation had explained so much, why I always felt different, why they'd found it so easy to abandon me, why their love had always felt conditional and distant. I wasn't really their daughter. The door to my study opens, and Mom appears with a tentative knock. Sarah, I brought you some tea. Come in, I say, closing the folder but leaving it visible on my desk. We need to talk. She sets the teacup down and takes the chair across from my desk, her eyes drawn to the official-looking documents spread. Before me, even in the lamplight, I can see her face grow pale. What are those? She asks, though her voice suggests she already knows. Birth certificates. I reply simply. 2 of them, actually. Which one would you like to discuss first? Her hands begin to shake slightly, and she clasps them together in her lap. Sarah, I don't understand what you're getting at. I think you do. I open the folder and slide the forged certificate toward her. This is the one you filed when I was born. The one that lists Richard Mitchell as my father and moves my birth date to October instead of July. She stares at the document without touching it, as if it might burn her. And this, I continue, placing the authentic certificate beside it, is the real one. The one that lists my biological father as James Patterson, your married boss at the insurance agency where you worked before I was born. The silence stretches between us, filled with 16 years of lies finally coming to light. Mom's face cycles through denial, fear, and resignation before settling on a kind of defeated acceptance. How did you find this? She whispers. Professional investigators are very thorough. They found the private adoption records, the sealed court documents, even the old employment records that show exactly when you started working for Patterson Insurance and when you stopped. I lean back in my chair, studying her face. James Patterson was married with 3 children. You were married? To Dad. An affair would have been inconvenient for everyone involved. It wasn't supposed to happen, she says quietly. It was just, I was lonely. Richard was working all the time, building the business. James was kind and attentive and convenient, I finish, until you got pregnant. She nods miserably. James wanted me to take care of it, but I couldn't. So we came up with a plan. The plan being to pass me off as Dad's daughter and hope no one would notice. Richard never questioned it. He was so busy with work, and the timing seemed right. We've been trying to have another baby anyway. But you knew, I say, every day for 16 years, you knew I wasn't really his daughter. You were our daughter, she says, finally looking up at me. We raised you, we loved you. Did you? I interrupt. Because it seems like you found it remarkably easy to throw away someone you claim to love. That's not fair. What's not? Fair is lying to a child about who she is for her entire life. What's not fair is making her believe she's part of a family that never really accepted her because she was living proof of your infidelity. The word hangs between us like an accusation. Mom flinches as if I've slapped her. Does Dad know? I ask. No, she whispers. At least, I don't think so. He's never said anything, but he suspected. It's not a question. I've had 2 years to analyze every interaction, every memory, every moment of distance I'd felt from the man I'd called father. The pieces fit together perfectly now why he never quite looked at me the same way he'd looked at Marcus. Why? My achievements had never seemed to matter as much. Why he'd found it easier to sacrifice me when money got tight. Maybe, she admits, you don't look like him. You don't act like him. You're so much smarter, so driven. Nothing like nothing. Like his real child, I finish. Nothing like Marcus. I tried to make it work, she says desperately. I tried to love you the same way, to treat you the same way. But it was complicated. Complicated for you. For me, it was just my life. A life where I never understood why it didn't quite fit, why I always felt like I was auditioning for acceptance. In my own family, I pick up the authentic birth certificate, studying the name listed as my biological father. James Patterson had died in a car accident when I was 12. I'd never known him, never even known he existed. Did he ever ask about me? I ask. James Patterson? Mom's face crumples. Once, when you were about 8, he'd seen you at a school play. He said you looked like his sister when she was young. And what did you tell him? That he needed to stay away. That he'd made his choice when he asked me to get rid of you. The casual cruelty of it hits me like a physical blow. Not only had they lied to me about my identity, but they denied me the possibility of knowing my real father. They'd made choices for me without my knowledge or consent, then acted like. I should be grateful for the fractured family they provided. There's more, isn't there? I ask, seeing something in her expression. She nods reluctantly. James had life insurance. When he died, there was a provision for any children he might have had outside his marriage. How much? $50,000. It would have paid for your college, maybe more. And you never claimed it. I couldn't. It would have meant acknowledging that he was your father. Richard would have found out. His wife would have found out. So you let me believe I had no money for college. You let me work multiple jobs and live in shelters and struggle to pay for community college when there was money that legally belonged to me. I was protecting the family. You were protecting yourself. I correct. You were protecting your secret, your lie, your comfortable life built on deception. I stand up and walk to the window, looking out at the city lights below. Everything makes sense now, the emotional distance, the favoritism toward Marcus, the ease with which they'd abandoned me. I hadn't just been the inconvenient child. I'd been the living reminder of Mom's betrayal. Does Marcus know? I ask without turning around. No, no one knows except you and me. And James Patterson's family. They must have suspected something when there was an unclaimed inheritance provision. They might have wondered, but they never pursued it. I turn back to face her. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. You had an affair with your married boss. You got pregnant and decided to pass me off as your husband's child. You forged documents to hide my real birth date and paternity. When my biological father died, you chose to let money that belonged to me go unclaimed rather than reveal the truth. And when times got tough, you found it convenient to throw away the child who's never really yours anyway. It wasn't like that, she protests weakly. Then what was it like? Because from where I'm sitting, It looks like you spent 16 years lying to everyone, including yourself, about what I meant to your family. You meant everything to us, she says, tears streaming down her face. You were our daughter in every way that mattered. Except when it came time to choose between my welfare and your secret, then I was expendable. We thought you'd be fine. You were always so strong, so independent. I was strong because I had to be. I was independent because you never let me depend on you. And maybe I inherited those traits from a father I never got to know because you decided his existence was inconvenient. I sit back down at my desk, pulling out a legal document I've had prepared for months. I claim the inheritance, I tell her. 2 years ago, when I first discovered the truth. $50,000 plus 16 years of compound interest. It's sitting in an account, waiting for me to decide what to do with it. Sarah, I also had DNA tests run. On me, on samples I collected from items in your old house before it was foreclosed. The tests confirm what the birth certificate shows Richard. Mitchell's not my biological father. Her face goes completely white. What are you going to do with that information? I haven't decided yet. It depends on what happens over the next 30 days. You wouldn't tell Richard, would you? It would destroy him. Would it? Or would it finally explain why he found it so easy to throw me away? Please, Sarah. He's been through enough. Has he? Because I've been through 16 years of believing I was abandoned by my real father. Finding out he was actually protecting himself from the truth seems like it might be important information. I close the folder and slide it into my desk drawer. Here's what's going to happen. I say, you're going to think very carefully about how much truth you're willing to tell. About the affair, about my paternity, about the choices you made to. Protect your secret. Because I'm done living with the consequences of your lies. What do you want from me? I want you to stop pretending that what happened to me was about money or family preservation or any of the other convenient excuses you've been telling yourselves. I want you to admit that you threw away a child who was inconvenient to your fiction. And if I do that, then maybe we can start building something real instead of something based on lies. I watch her struggle with the choice comfort of continued deception versus the difficulty of truth. After 16 years of living with her lies, she's being asked to confront the reality of what they cost. I need time to think, she says finally. You have 30 days, I remind her. Same as everyone else. As she leaves my study, I pull out my phone and scroll to a contact I've never called. Patterson, Michael. James Patterson's eldest son, now 42 and a successful attorney in San Francisco. My half-brother doesn't know I exist, but I know everything about him. I know he's married with 2 daughters, that he volunteers at a literacy foundation, that he looks remarkably like me around the eyes. I could call him tonight. I could introduce myself and shatter his understanding of his family the same way. My understanding has been shattered. Or I could wait, see if my parents, the people who raised me, are capable of choosing truth over comfort for once in their lives. The phone sits in my hand, heavy with possibility and consequence. For the first time in 16 years, I hold the power to reveal secrets instead of being crushed by them. The question is, what kind of person do I want to be? The kind who uses truth as a weapon, or the kind who uses it as a foundation for something better? I suppose that depends on what my family chooses to build with the time I've given them. The next morning, I find Dad in the garage, methodically organizing my tools with the kind of precision that speaks of a man trying to impose order on chaos. Grandfather's war letters are spread across my workbench documents I've requested from the family estate years ago. Part of my investigation into patterns I was only beginning to understand. You kept these, he says without looking up from a letter dated 1943. I keep everything that helps me understand where I came from, I reply, settling onto a stool beside the workbench. Even the uncomfortable truths. He picks up one of the letters, his hands gentle with the fragile paper. I haven't read these in 30 years. Maybe you should. They're illuminating. The letter in his hands is from my grandfather to his brother, written from a foxhole in Italy. It talks about the family he'd left behind, a wife and infant son he barely knew, responsibilities that felt overwhelming to a 20-year-old soldier who'd grown up during the Depression. He was just a kid, Dad says quietly. Same age you were when you started the construction company. Same age I was when I started my first business, but he didn't have choices. The war, the Depression, everything was out of his control. Was it? I asked, because from these letters, it sounds like he made a lot of choices. About what kind of father he wanted to be, what kind of husband, what kind of man. Dad sets down the letter and picks up another one, this one written after my father was born. Grandfather writes about feeling trapped by fatherhood, about wanting to disappear rather than face the responsibility of raising a child he hadn't planned for. He came back from the war different, Dad says. Mom used to say it was like living with a stranger, but he came back. He didn't abandon his family. No, but he wasn't really present either. Physically there, but emotionally, Dad trails off, lost in memories I can see playing across his face. Tell me about your childhood, I say. He laughs bitterly. What childhood? I was working construction jobs with him from the time I was 12. Learning the trade, he called it. Really, I was just cheap labor. I study his profile, sing echoes of the boy he'd been in the set of his jaw. The way his shoulders carried tension like armor. Did he ever tell you he loved you? The question hangs in the air for a long moment. When Dad finally answers, his voice is barely above a whisper. Once, the day he died, he was in the hospital, full of morphine and regret. He said he was sorry for not knowing how to be a father, sorry for treating work like it was more important than family. But by then, it was too late to change anything. By then, I was already making the same mistakes with my own kids. The admission surprises me with its honesty. I'd expected defensiveness, justification, the rewriting of history that had characterized most of our conversations. Instead, I'm seeing something I've never witnessed before, genuine self-reflection. What mistakes? I asked gently, putting the business first, thinking that providing for the family was the same thing as loving the family. Working so much that I missed. He stops, his voice catching. Miss what? Everything. Your school plays, Marcus's games, your mother's attempts to talk to me about problems I was too tired to hear. He picks up another letter, this one written after the war when Grandfather had returned home and was struggling to adjust to civilian life. The letter details his drinking, his anger, his inability to connect with a son he barely knew. He used to disappear for days, Dad continues. Construction jobs in other cities, he'd say, but we all knew he was just running away from us, from the responsibility of being a father. And you learned that work was an acceptable escape. I learned that men in our family don't know how to stick around when things get difficult. The pattern is becoming clear now. Generations of Mitchell men who'd used work, war, or abandonment to avoid the messy complexity of emotional intimacy. Grandfather had been physically present but emotionally absent. Dad had been present but distant. And when the pressure became too much, they'd both found ways to sacrifice their children's emotional needs for their own comfort. Is that why you kicked me out? I ask, because running away was the family tradition. Dad's hands still on the letter he's holding. I told myself it was about money, about saving the family. But maybe it was easier to eliminate a problem than to figure out how to solve it. I wasn't a problem, Dad. I was your daughter. I know that now. His voice breaks slightly. But then you represented everything I was failing at. You were smart enough to see through my excuses, driven enough to succeed where I was failing, independent enough to survive without me, and that scared me. So you made sure I'd have to survive without you. I made sure I wouldn't have to face my failures every day. The honesty is brutal and unexpected. I prepared for denial, for blame shifting, for the kind of emotional manipulation that had characterized my childhood. I hadn't prepared for this raw acknowledgement of his own shortcomings. What about Marcus? I ask, why was it different with him? Dad sets down the letter and turns to face me directly for the first time in our conversation. Marcus was easy. He needed me in simple ways: money for sports, rides to practice, someone to cheer from the sidelines. With you, it was complicated. You needed things I didn't know how to give. Like what? Emotional support, intellectual challenge. Someone who understood that you were different from other kids. Not because there was something wrong with you, but because you were smarter, more complex, more capable of seeing the truth. And the truth was uncomfortable. The truth was that I was failing. As a father, as a husband, as a business owner. You could see it even when you were little. The way you'd watch me during arguments with your mother, like you were trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. I was trying to figure out how to help, I say quietly. I know, but it felt like judgment, so you eliminated the judge. I eliminated the reminder of everything I wasn't capable of being. We sit in silence, surrounded by the echoes of 3 generations of Mitchell men who'd struggled with the weight of family responsibility. Grandfather had carried the trauma of war and depression. Dad had carried the burden of an emotionally distant father and mounting business pressure. Each had found their own way to fail the people who needed them most. The difference, I say finally, is that I learned to break the pattern. How? By refusing to abandon the people who depend on me. By building something sustainable instead of just surviving day to day. By choosing to face problems instead of running from them. Dad nods slowly. You learned to be the parent we never were. I learned to be the person I needed when I was 16 and had nowhere to go. And now we're the ones with nowhere to go. The irony isn't lost on me. He picks up the last letter in the stack one written from grandfather to his own father, a man who'd abandoned his family during the Depression to look for work and never returned. It goes back even further, Dad says, reading. His father, his grandfather, generations of men who found reasons to leave when things got hard. But you didn't leave, I point out. You stayed with Mom, you kept trying to save the business. I threw away my daughter. He interrupts. That's not staying. That's choosing which part of my responsibility I could live without. The words hit like a physical blow, not because they're cruel, but because they're true. He'd found a way to abandon me while maintaining the fiction that he was a family man who took care of his responsibilities. I can't change what I did, he continues. I can't give you back your childhood or undo the damage I caused. But I can. Stop pretending it was anyone's fault but mine. What about the business pressure? The financial stress? Excuses? Plenty of men face financial difficulties without throwing away their children. What about Mom's lies? The questions about my paternity? He looks up sharply. What questions about your paternity? For a moment, I consider telling him the truth about the affair, about James Patterson, about the DNA tests. But looking at his face, I realize that some truths are more destructive than constructive. He's finally taking responsibility for his choices. Learning that one of those choices was based on a lie might shatter the progress we're making. Just that I never felt like I really belonged, I say instead. Like there was something about me that didn't fit the family dynamic. That wasn't about you, he says firmly. That was about me not knowing how to love a daughter who was smarter and stronger than I was. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out if it's too late to learn. I really look at him and see not the man who threw me away, but the boy who'd grown up with an emotionally unavailable father, who'd learned that love was conditional and responsibility was a burden to be escaped. It's not too late, I say, but it's going to require you to do something no Mitchell man has ever done before. What's that? Stay, not just physically, but emotionally. Show up for the hard conversations, take responsibility for your failures, and figure out how to love people without conditions. I don't know if I know how to do that. Then you better learn. Because I'm not 16 anymore and I won't be abandoned again. If you want to be part of my life, you have to show up for all of it, not just the easy parts. Dad nods slowly, gathering up grandfather's letters with reverent care. These stay here, he says, as a reminder of what we don't want to become. They're already serving that purpose, I reply. The question is whether you're ready to become something different. As he walks away, I remain in the garage surrounded by the tools and letters that tell the story of my family's dysfunction. 3 generations of men who'd run from responsibility, each in their own way. But I'm not running. I'm standing still, forcing them to face the consequences of their choices, giving them the chance to break the pattern that has defined our family for decades. Whether they take that chance is up to them. The unsigned check sits on my desk like a test of character theirs and mine. $500,000, enough to set them up in a modest home, cover their basic expenses for years, give them the fresh start they claim to want. All it needs is my signature, but signatures carry weight, and this one would carry more than just money. It would carry my forgiveness, my acceptance, my willingness to let the past fade into something manageable. The question is whether they've earned it. It's been 2 weeks since they arrived. 2 weeks of watching them navigate the strange territory of depending on someone they'd once discarded. The dynamic has shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Dad has thrown himself into the maintenance work with an intensity that borders on obsessive, as if he can repair 16 years of damage by fixing every loose board and leaky faucet in my house. Mom has taken over the household management with military precision, organizing my staff and handling my foundation's correspondence with the kind of attention to detail that speaks of someone desperate to prove their value. Marcus has been the most interesting to watch. The manual labor has been good for him. His body is starting to lose the softness that had come from years of easy living. And more importantly, his attitude is changing. The entitlement that had characterized our first conversations has been replaced by something that might actually be humility. This morning I found him in the garden at dawn, planting flowers he'd bought with his own money, the first wages he'd earned in months from helping my landscaper. He'd looked up when he'd seen me watching, his face flushed with something that might have been pride. "They're perennials," he'd said. "They'll come back every year." The metaphor hadn't been lost on either of us. Now, sitting in my office, I'm trying to decide what kind of person I want to be. The kind who uses power to punish, or the kind who uses it to heal. The kind who lets past wounds define future relationships, or the kind who chooses to build something new from the wreckage of what came before. There's a knock on my door, and I look up to see all 3 of them standing there with the nervous energy of students waiting for test results. "Come in," I say, sliding the check into a folder. They arrange themselves in the chairs facing my desk with the careful positioning of people who understand they're about to receive judgment. Dad sits with his hands folded, his calloused fingers bearing fresh cuts from his repair work. Mom clutches a manila folder that I suspect contains the household reports she's been preparing with meticulous care. Marcus is cleaned up from his gardening, but there's still dirt under his fingernails, evidence of honest work. "It's been 2 weeks," I begin. "We agreed to use this time for honest conversations about what happened and what comes next." "We've been thinking," Mom says, her voice carefully modulated, "about everything you've said, about the choices we made, about what we owe you. And what conclusions have you reached?" Dad clears his throat. "That we were wrong. Not just about the financial situation, not just about our priorities, but about you, about who you were and what you deserve from us. Go on." "We threw you away to save ourselves," Marcus says, his voice steady but quiet. "We told ourselves it was about money or family preservation, but really we were protecting our own comfort, at your expense." I study their faces, looking for signs of performance, for the kind of scripted apology designed to get them what they want rather than address what they'd done. What I see instead is something I hadn't expected: genuine shame. "Why now?" I ask. Why this realization now, instead of 16 years ago when it might have mattered? Because 16 years ago, we didn't have to face the consequences, Mom admits. You were gone. The problem was solved, and we could tell ourselves whatever. Story made us feel better about our choices. And now? Now we have to look at what our choices cost, Dad says. Not just what they cost you, but what they cost us. We threw away our daughter and spent 16 years pretending she was dead, rather than admitting what we'd done. Marcus told you about that conversation. Dad nods. He told us everything. About the lies, about the gambling, about the way he's been carrying guilt he didn't know how to process. I turn to Marcus. And how do you feel about telling the truth? About admitting to people that I'm alive? Terrified, he says honestly, but also relieved. I've been carrying this lie for so long that I'd forgotten what the truth felt like. It feels like freedom, Mom adds quietly. Being able to talk about you as our daughter instead of our dead daughter. Being able to be proud of what you've accomplished instead of having to pretend you never existed. Are you proud? I ask. Beyond words, Dad says. Not just of your success, but of the person you became despite everything we failed to give you. You gave me something, I say. Just not what you intended. What's that? You gave me the knowledge that I could survive anything, that I could build something meaningful from nothing, that my worth wasn't dependent on other people's approval or support. That's a terrible gift to give a child, Mom says, tears starting to form. It was, but it was also a powerful one. Most people never learn that they're stronger than they think they are. I learned it at 16. I open the folder and pull out the unsigned check, setting it on the desk where they can all see. It $500,000, I say. Enough to start over somewhere new. Enough to live modestly for the rest of your lives without worrying about basic necessities. Their eyes fix on the check with the intensity of people who've learned what it means to have nothing. But I continue. Money doesn't solve the fundamental problem. It doesn't change the fact that you abandoned your daughter when she needed you most. It doesn't erase 16 years of lies and justifications. It doesn't guarantee that you won't make the same choices again when things get difficult. What do you want from us? Marcus asks. I want to know that you understand the difference between being sorry you got caught and being sorry for what you did. I want to know that this isn't just desperation talking, but genuine recognition of the damage you caused. How can we prove that? Mom asks. By making different choices going forward. By prioritizing truth over comfort. By taking responsibility for your actions instead of looking for excuses or someone else to blame. I pick up the check and hold. It between us, this money comes with conditions. Not just for the 30 days you're staying here, but for the rest of our relationship. What conditions? Dad asks. First, you tell everyone the truth about what happened to me. No more lies about car accidents or family decisions. You explain that you abandoned your daughter and that she survived and succeeded despite your failure. That will ruin what's left of our reputation, Marcus says. Your reputation was ruined by your own choices. This is just acknowledging the truth of that. What else? Mom asks. Second, you get professional help. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes to address the patterns that led to your decision to abandon me. I won't have a relationship with people who might throw me away again when things get inconvenient. And third, Dad asks. Third, you prove over time that you've actually changed. Not just with words, but with actions. By showing up for difficult conversations. By taking responsibility when you make mistakes. By choosing family over comfort, truth over convenience. I set the check back down on the desk. If you can do those things, if you can prove that you're capable of being the family you should have been 16 years ago, then this money is yours and so is a place in my life. And if we can't, Marcus asks, then you leave in 2 weeks with enough money to get started somewhere else, and we don't see each other again. You go back to telling people I'm dead, and this time it'll be true as far as you're concerned. The room falls silent, except for the sound of traffic outside my office windows. They're processing what I've offered them, a chance at redemption that requires genuine change, not just repentance. We accept, Dad says, finally, whatever it takes. All of you. Mom and Marcus nod, their faces showing a mixture of relief and determination. Then we start tomorrow, I say, folding the check and putting it back in the folder. With complete honesty about the past and complete commitment to doing better in the future. As they file out of my office, I remain seated behind my desk, wondering if I've made the right choice. Forgiveness is a risk. It requires believing that people can change, that patterns can be broken, that love can be rebuilt on a foundation of truth instead of convenience. But maybe that's what family really means, not the people who are easy to love, but people you choose to love anyway, despite their failures and your own. The check remains unsigned for now. Whether it ever gets signed depends on whether they prove worthy of the trust I'm offering them. For the first time in 16 years, I'm willing to find out. The lease agreement sits on the kitchen table like a contract for their souls. 12 pages of carefully worded terms that outline not just their living arrangements, but the boundaries I've never been able to establish as their daughter. As a landlord, however, I have legal standing to enforce rules they'll actually have to follow. This is really necessary? Dad asks, flipping through the pages with the expression of someone who's never had to sign a lease in his life. Everything in business is necessary, I reply, settling into the chair across from him with my morning coffee. Including family business? Mom reads over his shoulder, her face growing paler with each page. Some of these terms seem harsh. Which ones concern you? The part about overnight guests requiring 24-hour notice. The restrictions on alcohol consumption. The requirement for weekly check-ins with a family therapist. Standard lease provisions for a transitional living situation. I explained, though we all know this is anything but standard. Think of it as accountability measures. Marcus appears in the doorway, fresh from his morning run around the neighborhood. The daily exercise has become part of his routine, another sign that he's taking his recovery seriously. He's lost 15 pounds and gained something that might actually be self-respect. Are we really doing this? He asks, seeing the papers spread across the table. We're establishing clear expectations, I say, for all of us. I point to a specific clause. Section 3 outlines your responsibilities within the household. Dad, you'll continue handling maintenance and repairs, but now there's a schedule and accountability measures. Mom, you'll manage household staff coordination and assist with my foundation's administrative work, with defined hours and performance metrics. And me? Marcus asks. You'll handle groundskeeping and pool maintenance, plus you'll assist with the foundation's youth mentorship program. Your construction background makes you qualified to help with our shelter renovation project. You have a shelter renovation project? I'm buying a building downtown. It'll house 40 homeless teenagers while they get back on their feet. You'll help oversee the construction under my supervision. The irony isn't lost on any of us. Marcus will be helping to build a shelter for kids like I had been, kids abandoned by families who found them inconvenient. Why? He asks quietly. Because someone needs to. And because you need to understand what it means to help instead of just taking help. Dad sets down the lease agreement and looks at me directly. This isn't just about housing arrangements, is it? No, it's about learning to function as a family with boundaries, responsibilities, and consequences. Things we never had when I was growing up. We had rules when you were a child, Mom protests. You had expectations. Different things. Rules are agreements that everyone follows, with clear consequences when they're broken. Expectations are just disappointments waiting to happen. I flip to the section that outlines the consequences for lease violations, everything from additional household duties to potential eviction. Depending on the severity of the infraction, what's this about mandatory family meetings? Dad asks. Every Sunday evening, we'll sit down and discuss how things are going. Any problems, any concerns, any progress we're making. No one gets to avoid difficult conversations anymore, and if we refuse to participate, then you're choosing to leave, which is fine, it's your choice to make. But you don't get to stay in my house while refusing to engage in the work of rebuilding our relationship. Marcus sits down at the table, reading the lease more carefully. This clause about personal accountability, what does that mean exactly? It means taking responsibility for your actions and their consequences. It means apologizing when you're wrong, making amends when you cause harm, and changing your behavior when it's problematic. And you, Mom asks, what are your obligations in this arrangement? I flip to the final page where my responsibilities are outlined. I provide safe housing, basic utilities, food allowance, and transportation assistance. I also commit to engaging in the family therapy process and maintaining open communication about household issues. But you hold all the power, Dad observes. Yes, because I'm the one who owns the house, pays the bills, and has demonstrated the ability to maintain stable relationships and finances. When you prove you can do the same, we can renegotiate the terms. How long is this lease for? Mom asks. 6 months initially, with the option to renew based on performance and mutual agreement. And after that, we reassess. Maybe you're ready to live independently again. Maybe we've built enough trust to have a different kind of relationship. Or maybe this arrangement doesn't work and we go our separate ways. I can see them processing the reality of what I'm offering, not unconditional family acceptance, but a structured opportunity to earn their way back into my life. There's one more thing, I say, pulling out a separate document. This is a financial accountability agreement. Any money I provide beyond basic living expenses, the $500,000 I mentioned, assistance with job searches, help with securing housing comes with reporting requirements. What kind of reporting? Marcus asks. Monthly financial statements, showing how money is spent, proof of job search activities, evidence of compliance with therapy recommendations. Essentially, the same kind of accountability I'd require from any business partner. We're not your business partners, Mom says. We're your family. You're my family who threw me away when money got tight. Forgive me if I don't trust your financial judgment without verification. The words sting, but they're true. These are people who'd make catastrophically poor decisions about money, relationships, and priorities. Trust needs to be rebuilt slowly, with evidence. What about privacy? Dad asks. These reporting requirements seem invasive. Privacy is earned. When you demonstrate that you can make good decisions without oversight, you'll get more privacy. Until then, transparency is the price of my financial support. I stand up and walk to the window, looking out at the pool where Marcus has been working every morning. The water is clearer than it's ever been. The surrounding plants healthier and more carefully tended. Small signs of improvement that give me hope this arrangement might actually work. I know this feels controlling, I say without turning around. I know it's not the family reunion you were hoping for. But this is what healthy boundaries look like when trust has been broken. We understand, Dad says quietly. We're not used to being held accountable. I noticed. That's part of the problem. I turned back to face them. When I was 16 and homeless, I had to follow rules at every shelter, every transitional housing program, every job I worked. I had to prove myself worthy of basic consideration from strangers who owed me nothing. That must have been hard. Mom says it was educational. I learned that respect is earned, that trust is built through consistent actions, and that healthy relationships require boundaries that protect everyone involved. And now you're teaching us those same lessons, Marcus observes. I am offering you the same opportunities I had the chance to prove you're worthy of trust and support. The difference is, I'm your daughter offering you shelter, not strangers offering charity. Dad picks up the pen and hovers it over the signature line. If we sign this, we're agreeing to be accountable to you in ways we've never been accountable. To anyone. That's correct. And if we don't sign it, then you have 2 weeks to find alternative arrangements, and our relationship ends here. Those are our only options. Those are the only options that protect my emotional and financial well-being while giving you a chance to prove you've changed. I sit back down at the table, my voice taking on the gentle but firm tone I use with clients who are struggling to accept necessary changes. Look, I could just write you a check and send you on your way. It will be easier for everyone. But easy isn't what any of us need right now. We need to know if it's possible to build something real together, or if the damage is too extensive to repair. And this process will tell us which one it is? Mom asks. This process will force us to develop the skills we need to have a healthy relationship. Communication, accountability, mutual respect, clear boundaries. If we can learn to function as a family within this structure, then maybe we can function as a family outside of it. And if we can't, then we'll know that too. And we can stop pretending that biology automatically creates functional relationships. Marcus reaches for the pen. Where do I sign? Are you sure? Mom asks him. This is a big commitment. Mom, I've been living without accountability my entire adult life. Look where it got me. He gestures around the kitchen of my mansion. living off my sister's charity because I gambled away everything I inherited and destroyed every opportunity I was given. He signs his name with steady hands, then slides the document to Dad. Marcus is right, Dad says. We've been operating without real accountability for years. Maybe that's why everything fell apart. He signs next, then hands the pen to Mom. She hesitates, the pen trembling slightly in her hand. What if we fail? What if we can't live up to these standards? Then you fail, I say gently, but you fail while trying to become better people, which is more dignity than you had when you were just making excuses. And you? She asks. What if you can't learn to trust us again? Then I'll have given you every reasonable opportunity to earn that trust. If it doesn't work, it won't be because I didn't try. Mom signs her name with a flourish that reminds me of the woman she'd been when I was little confident, decisive, unafraid of challenges. There, she says, setting down the pen. We're officially your tenants. You're officially my family. Members who are learning to be trustworthy, I correct. The tenancy part is just the legal framework that makes it enforceable. Dad gathers up the signed documents. When do we start? We already have. The first family meeting is this Sunday. I've scheduled individual therapy sessions for each of you this week, and group therapy starts next Monday. Individual therapy? Marcus asks. You can't fix a relationship between people who haven't done the work to understand their own issues. We all need to get our individual houses in order before we can build a functional family structure. What kind of therapy? Mom asks nervously. The kind that helps you understand why you made the choices you made and how to make better choices going forward. Don't worry, I've already been in therapy for 2 years. It's not as scary as you think. You've been in therapy? I've been dealing with abandonment issues, trust problems, and the challenge of building healthy relationships when your primary model of family was dysfunctional. Therapy helped me understand that I could break those patterns. I collect the signed lease, agreements, and file them in a folder marked family business. One more thing, I say. This arrangement doesn't mean we're automatically back to being a normal family. We're people who happen to be related, working on building a functional relationship. That might eventually look like family, or it might look like something else entirely. What do you hope it looks like? Dad asks. I hope it looks like people who choose to be in each other's lives because they add value to those lives, not because they're obligated by biology or guilt or desperation. And if it works, Mom asks, if we learn to be the family we should have been, then maybe, I say, we'll discover that it was worth the wait. As they leave the kitchen to begin their new lives as my tenants, I remain at the table, looking at the signed agreements that represent something I never thought possible, my family agreeing to be held accountable for their treatment of me. It's not love yet. It might never be love, but it's a foundation on which something healthy could potentially be built. And for the first time in 16 years, that feels like enough of a beginning. Dr. Martinez's office feels like neutral territory, a place where we can say things that would be impossible to voice in my kitchen or their former home. The therapy session notes scattered across her desk represent 6 weeks of individual and group work, 6 weeks of slowly peeling back layers of dysfunction that had seemed normal until we'd started examining them under professional guidance. How did everyone feel about last week's homework assignment? Dr. Martinez asks, settling into her chair with the calm presence that makes difficult conversations feel manageable. The assignment had been simple in concept, devastating in execution. Each of us had to write a letter to our 16-year-old selves, acknowledging what we'd needed then and what we'd actually received. Dad shifts uncomfortably in his chair. It was harder than I expected. What made it difficult? Admitting that the kid I was needed things I never got, and that I repeated the same pattern with my own children. Dr. Martinez nods encouragingly. Would you be willing to share what you wrote? Dad pulls out a crumpled piece of paper, his handwriting more hesitant than the confident script I remember from business documents. Dear Richard, he reads, his voice barely above a whisper. You deserve a father who is present, not just physically, but emotionally. You deserve someone who taught you that your worth wasn't measured by how much you could accomplish or how little trouble you caused. You deserve to know that love didn't have to be earned through perfect behavior. He pauses, struggling with the next part. I'm sorry I gave you the same emotional distance my father gave me. I'm sorry I taught you that work was more important than relationships. And I'm sorry it took losing everything, including the daughter. I threw away to realize that I'd been repeating his mistakes. The room falls silent except for the soft sound of Mom crying. When Dad finishes reading, he folds the letter carefully and puts it back in his pocket. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Martinez says. What did writing it teach you? That I've been running from emotional intimacy my entire life. That I threw Sarah away because she demanded something from me I didn't know how to give real connection instead of just provision. And how does that awareness feel? Terrifying, but also freeing. For the first time, I understand why I made the choices I made, instead of just feeling guilty about them. Dr. Martinez turns to Mom. Linda, would you like to share yours? Mom's letter is longer, written on her personal stationery in the careful handwriting she'd used for thank you. Notes and grocery lists throughout my childhood. Dear Linda, she begins, her voice stronger than Dad's but still shaking. You deserve parents who taught you that your worth wasn't dependent on keeping everyone happy. You deserve to learn how to handle conflict directly, instead of through manipulation and lies. She glances at me before continuing. I'm sorry I taught you that love was conditional on convenience. I'm sorry I showed you that it was acceptable to sacrifice one person's needs for another's comfort. And I'm sorry I passed those patterns on to my children, especially Sarah. What was it like to acknowledge those patterns? Dr. Martinez asks. Humbling. I spent so many years convinced that I was protecting my family. When really, I was protecting myself from having to face difficult truths. Such as the fact that I chose Richard's comfort over Sarah's safety. That I chose to maintain my lies over acknowledging her true parentage. That I consistently chose the path that caused the least immediate disruption, regardless of the long-term damage. Dr. Martinez makes a note before turning to Marcus. How about you? Marcus has been unusually quiet during this session, his letters still folded in his lap. The past 6 weeks of therapy have been particularly challenging for him confronting. A lifetime of entitlement and unearned privilege isn't easy work. Dear Marcus, he reads slowly. You deserve parents who taught you that your value came from your character, not your achievements. You deserve to learn how to handle failure and disappointment without falling apart or blaming others. He stops, taking a deep breath before continuing. I'm sorry I let them teach you that you were special instead of teaching you to be useful. I'm sorry I never learned to see Sarah as a person instead of competition for their attention. And I'm sorry it took losing everything to realize that I'd never actually earned anything. What's been the most difficult part of this process for you? Dr. Martinez asks, realizing that Sarah succeeded because of qualities I never developed. Work ethic, resilience, the ability to create value instead of just consuming it. She became everything I could have been if I'd learned to earn what I received. And how? Does that realization affect your relationship with Sarah now? It makes me want to become worthy of being her brother, instead of just expecting her to accept me because we share DNA. Dr. Martinez turns to me. Sarah, you've been quiet today. How are you processing what you're hearing? I've been listening to their letters with a mixture of validation and sadness. Validation because they're finally acknowledging truths I'd sensed, but couldn't articulate as a child. Sadness because these realizations came at such a high cost for all of us. It's healing to hear them take responsibility, I say carefully, but it's also overwhelming. For 16 years, I've carried the weight of wondering what was wrong with me that made them able to throw me away so easily. And now? Now I understand that it was never about me. It was about their inability to handle the complexity of loving someone who demanded authentic relationship instead of just surface-level family performance. How does that understanding change things for you? It makes forgiveness possible. Not automatic, but possible. When I thought they'd rejected me because I was inherently flawed or unlovable, forgiveness felt like accepting that judgment. Now I understand they rejected me because I threatened their comfort zones, Dr. Martinez leans forward slightly. What would need to happen for you to feel safe being vulnerable with them again? The question cuts to the heart of everything we've been working toward. Trust isn't rebuilt through apologies or insights. It's rebuilt through consistent actions that demonstrate change. I need to see them make different choices when things get difficult, I say. I need to know that they won't abandon ship the next time life gets complicated. What would that look like practically? Staying engaged in this therapy process even when it's uncomfortable, following through on their commitments even when they don't feel like it, choosing truth over convenience in their daily interactions. And what are you willing to offer in return? The opportunity to earn my trust. Not unconditional acceptance, but genuine openness to the possibility that they can become the family they should have been. Dad speaks up. What if we can't? What if we try but we're too damaged to change enough? Then we'll know that too, I reply. And we can stop hoping for something that isn't possible. That scares me, Mom admits. It should. But it's also honest. And honesty is the only foundation that real relationships can be built on. Dr. Martinez glances at her notes. I want to try an exercise. Each of you tell Sarah one specific way you're going to demonstrate trustworthiness this week. Dad goes first. I'm going to finish the shelter renovation budget you asked for, and I'm going to do it without cutting corners or padding numbers to make myself look better. How will that demonstrate trustworthiness? Because it shows I can be relied on to deliver quality work even when no one is watching over my shoulder. Mom nods. I'm going to tell my sister Susan the truth about Sarah being alive and successful. I've been avoiding that conversation because I'm embarrassed, but hiding the truth is the same pattern that got us into this mess. And you, Marcus? I'm going to attend the NA meeting you suggested, even though I don't think my gambling problem is that serious. Because if I'm wrong about its severity, I need to know that before it destroys something else. Dr. Martinez turns to me. And what will you do to demonstrate your willingness to rebuild this relationship? I'm going to show them the shelter plans. Not just assign them work on the project, but include them in the vision for what we're building together. Why is that significant? Because it means I'm willing to share something that matters deeply to me. It means I'm treating them like partners in something meaningful, not just people I'm helping out of obligation. As we file out of Dr. Martinez's office, I notice something that hadn't been there at the beginning of our sessions. We walk together instead of in separate clusters. Small signs of connection that speak to progress being made. Sarah, Dad says, as we reach the parking lot, thank you for not giving up on us. I haven't not given up on you. I correct gently. I've decided to see if giving up is necessary. What's the difference? The difference is that I'm not operating from faith or hope. I'm operating from curiosity about whether change is actually possible, and so far, you're proving that it might be. As they drive away in the car I'd bought them, I remain in the parking lot for a moment, processing the weight of what we're attempting. We're trying to rebuild a family relationship that was broken from the beginning. Using tools none of us learned as children. It might be impossible. But for the first time in 16 years, it also might be worth trying. And maybe I'm beginning to think that possibility is enough to justify the risk. The family trust documents spread across my dining room table represent more than legal paperwork. They represent a choice about what kind of legacy I want to build. 3 months of therapy, honest conversations, and careful observation have led to this moment. The decision about whether my family has earned their way back into my life permanently. The Mitchell Family Trust. Dad reads from the cover page, his voice careful and wondering. This makes it sound like we're a family, I finish, which is what we're trying to figure out. Mom sits across from me, her posture straighter than it's been since they arrived. 3 months of therapy and honest work have changed her in subtle but meaningful ways. She speaks more directly now, apologizes when she's wrong, and has stopped trying to manage everyone else's emotions. Marcus enters from the kitchen, carrying a tray of coffee that he's prepared without being asked, another small sign of the changes we've all been making. The entitled boy who'd arrived here has been replaced by a man who understands the value of contributing without being asked. What exactly does this trust do? He asks, setting down the coffee and taking a seat. It creates a legal framework for our family's financial relationship going forward, I explain. It also establishes clear expectations for behavior, accountability measures, and consequences for breaking those agreements. I flip to the first section. The trust provides each of you with a monthly stipend sufficient for modest independent living, not luxury, but security. Housing allowance, healthcare coverage, and a reasonable amount for personal expenses. For how long? Dad asks. Indefinitely, as long as you meet the trust's behavioral requirements, which are continued therapy participation, financial transparency, no gambling or substance abuse, and maintaining employment or meaningful volunteer work. And if we violate those terms, then your stipend is suspended until you complete remedial programs and demonstrate compliance. I turn to the next section. The trust also includes provisions for larger financial support assistance with home purchases, business startup capital, educational expenses, but those require unanimous family approval. Family approval? Mom asks. All four of us have. To agree that the expense is justified and that the recipient has demonstrated the responsibility to handle it well. So we all have veto power over each other's major financial decisions. We all have input. The final decision rests with a trust administrator, who is, initially, me. But the documents include provisions for transitioning that responsibility to an independent administrator if our family dynamic improves enough to warrant it. Marcus leans back in his chair. This is a lot of control you're maintaining. This is a lot of responsibility I'm accepting, I correct. The trust is funded with $10 million of my personal wealth. I think I'm entitled to ensure it's managed responsibly. $10 million, Dad repeats quietly. The amount you threw away when you abandoned me. The amount I had to build from nothing because you decided I wasn't worth supporting. The reminder hangs in the air not as an accusation now, but as context for why these safeguards are necessary. There's something else, I continue, flipping to a section marked Family Business Enterprises. The trust includes startup capital for a family construction company if we decide to pursue that option. Dad's eyes widen. A construction company? Mitchell and Associates. You'd handle project management, Marcus would focus on client relations, and business development, Mom would manage administration. I provide the capital, oversight, and business strategy. You trust us with that? Marcus asks. I'd trust us with that. If and only if we can demonstrate that we function as a healthy family unit. What would that look like? Mom asks. 6 more months of successful therapy, completion of the shelter renovation project, an agreement from Dr. Martinez that we've developed sustainable patterns of healthy communication and conflict resolution. I flip to the final section of the documents. There's also provision for what happens if this doesn't work out. Meaning, if any of us decides that we can't build a functional family relationship, there is a process for ending the trust arrangement with dignity. No one gets cut off or thrown away. But no one gets trapped in an unhealthy dynamic either. How would that work? Dad asks. 6 months notice, mediated discussions about the reasons for the decision, and transition support to help everyone move forward independently. And the money? Each of you would receive a final settlement sufficient to establish independent lives, not enough to be wealthy, but enough to be secure. Marcus studies the documents carefully. This is essentially a contract for being family. This is a framework for learning to be family, I correct. The contract part is just the legal structure that makes it enforceable. Why? Mom asks, why are you willing to do this? The question I've been asking myself for weeks. Why am I risking $10 million and significant emotional energy on people who once threw me away? Why am I creating legal obligations to support people who refused to support me when I needed it most? Because, I say slowly, I've learned that holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts you. And because I've built enough success to absorb the financial risk of this experiment. And if we disappoint you again, then I'll know I gave you every reasonable opportunity to prove you'd changed. I'll be able to move forward without wondering what if. I gather the documents into neat stacks. But I don't think you're going to disappoint me. Why not? Dad asks. Because you've already done the hardest part. You've acknowledged the truth about what you did and taken responsibility for the consequences. You've done the work to understand why you made those choices and how to make different ones going forward. And you? Marcus asks, what have you learned in this process? I've learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't matter. It's about choosing to build something new instead of being trapped by something old. And you're choosing to build something new with us? I'm choosing to see if something new is possible. The trust creates a structure where we can find out without anyone risking their basic security. Dad reaches for a pen. Where do we sign? Are you sure? I ask. This is a significant commitment, not just financially, but emotionally. If you sign these documents, you're agreeing to be accountable to each other in ways that most families never even attempt. Most families don't need to rebuild from this kind of damage, Mom points out. Most families don't get this kind of second chance. Marcus adds. Dad signs first, his signature steady and deliberate. Mom follows, then Marcus. When they're done, they slide the documents back to me. Your turn, Dad says. I pick up the pen, acutely aware that this signature will legally bind me to supporting them for years to come, possibly forever. It's a risk that goes against every survival instinct I've developed since they abandoned me. But it's also an opportunity to build something unprecedented, a family relationship based on choice rather than obligation, accountability rather than assumption, growth rather than stagnation. I sign my name with a flourish. So, Marcus says as I gather the signed documents, we're officially family again? We're officially committed to learning how to be family, I correct. The actual family part, that's something we'll have to build together, one day at a time. And if it works, we'll have created something better than what we had before. A family based on truth instead of lies, choice instead of convenience, mutual respect instead of conditional love. And if it doesn't work, then we'll have given each other the dignity of a real effort. And we'll be able to move forward knowing we tried to build something meaningful from the wreckage of what came before. As they file out of the dining room, chattering about the possibilities and responsibilities that lie ahead, I remain at the table surrounded by the legal documents that formalize our commitment to each other. It's not the family reunion I'd imagined as a child. It's something more complex, more fragile, and more honest than that. It's a family built on the understanding that love isn't automatic. It's something you choose over and over again, despite the risks and disappointments that choice inevitably brings. Whether we succeed or fail, we're no longer the family that throws people away when things get difficult. We're the family that does the hard work of staying together, even when staying is more challenging than leaving. And maybe, I think, as I file the documents in my safe, that's the most important difference of all. The new family photo sits on my mantle like a declaration, a possibility for people who look genuinely happy to be in each other's company. A stark contrast to the forced smiles and careful positioning of our old family pictures. 6 months of intentional work have changed us in ways that go far beyond legal documents and financial arrangements. I can't believe how different we all look, Mom says, studying the photo over my shoulder. She's right, the tension that had characterized our faces for decades has been replaced by something that might actually be peace. Dad appears from the kitchen, where he's been preparing dinner with the methodical care he once reserved for construction projects. Cooking has become his way of showing care, something tangible he can do that demonstrates his commitment to contributing to our family unit. The Hendersons called, he announces. They want to meet with us next week about the addition to their lake house. The Hendersons would be our third client as Mitchell & Associates, the family construction company that emerged from the trust documents. Our first project had been my youth shelter, a symbolic full-circle moment that had gone surprisingly well. Our second had been a small residential renovation, but had challenged us to work together under pressure. What's the scope? Marcus asks, entering from the home office where he's been working on proposals. His transformation has been perhaps the most dramatic, from entitled dilettante to capable businessman who understands that respect is earned through competence. Kitchen renovation, master suite addition, and a deck expansion. Nothing too complex, but it's a good fit for our current capacity. Our current capacity is something we've learned to assess honestly. We're not the construction company Dad once ran. We're smaller, more careful, more focused on quality than quantity. But we're also more sustainable, more ethical, and more genuinely collaborative. I'll work up the preliminary numbers, Marcus says. Sarah, do you want to review them before we submit? 6 months ago, Marcus never would have asked for my input. Now he understands that my business experience is an asset to be leveraged, not a threat to his ego. Email them to me by Friday, I say. I'll have feedback to you by Monday. This is how we function now as a team where everyone's strengths are utilized and everyone's limitations are acknowledged. It's a healthier dynamic than any of us experienced in our original family structure. How did the foundation board meeting go? Dad asks. Really well. We approved funding for 3 new youth programs and finalized the plans for the second shelter. Location. The Mitchell Foundation has become something I never expected. A family enterprise that allows us to channel our individual skills toward helping kids who remind us of who I once was. Dad oversees construction and facilities management. Mom handles administration and donor relations. Marcus coordinates with social services and community partners. We've found a way to transform our family's pain into something that helps others. Heal. Mrs. Peterson from the first shelter called yesterday. Mom reports. 3 more kids have transitioned to independent living and 2 more started college programs. That brings us to 18 successful transitions this year. Marcus adds proudly. These numbers matter to us in ways that business metrics never have. Each successful transition represents a kid who didn't get thrown away, who received the support and stability they needed to build something meaningful from a difficult start. Speaking of transitions, I say, settling into my favorite chair. With a cup of the coffee Dad has learned to make exactly the way I like it. Dr. Martinez wants to schedule our 6-month evaluation. The 6-month mark represents a milestone in our trust agreement, the point where we assess whether we've developed sustainable patterns of healthy family functioning. Are you nervous? Mom asks. Are you? Terrified, she admits. Not because I think we'll fail, but because I want this to work so badly. It is working, Dad points out. We're talking honestly about our feelings, we're supporting each other's goals. We're building something together instead of just surviving separately. And we're doing it by choice, Marcus adds. Not because we're trapped by obligation or convenience, but because we genuinely enjoy each other's company. This might be the most remarkable transformation of all. We actually like spending time together. Our Sunday family meetings have evolved from formal check-ins to genuine conversations about our lives, our goals, our concerns. We seek each other out for advice, support, and sometimes just companionship. What happens if Dr. Martinez says we're ready for the next phase? Mom asks, the next phase would mean transitioning from a trust-managed relationship to something more like a traditional family dynamic. Less formal oversight, more independence, the assumption that we can maintain healthy patterns without external accountability measures. And we decide if we want that, I say. Just because we're capable of independence doesn't mean we have to choose it. What do you mean? Marcus asks. I mean, maybe the structure we've built is better than what most families have. Maybe formal accountability measures and clear boundaries actually make relationships stronger, not weaker. You'd want to keep the trust structure permanently? I'd want to keep whatever works best for us as a family. If that's formal agreements and regular therapy check-ins, so be it. If it's something else, we'll figure that out together. Dad nods thoughtfully. I've never felt more secure in a family relationship than I do right now. The clarity of expectations, the safety of knowing exactly where we stand, it's actually freeing. Plus, Mom adds, we have built-in support for when things get difficult. Instead of falling back on old patterns or avoiding problems, we have tools and processes for working through them. And we have shared purpose, Marcus says, gesturing toward the foundation materials scattered across the coffee table. We're not just a family that shares DNA, we're a family that's building something meaningful together. I look around the room at these three people who once threw me away, and I'm struck by how fundamentally we've all changed. Not just our behaviors, but our understanding of what family means and what it requires. You know what I think we've learned? I say, what's that? Dad asks. That blood doesn't make you family. Choice makes you family. Daily choice, consistent choice, choice that persists even when it's difficult or inconvenient. And we're choosing each other, Mom says softly, every day, in ways both big and small. When Marcus asks for my business input instead of assuming he knows everything. When Dad shows care through cooking instead of just providing financially. When you tell the truth about difficult situations instead of managing everyone else's emotions. And when you trust us with meaningful responsibility instead of just helping us out of guilt, Marcus adds. When you include us in your success instead of keeping us at arm's length, Dad says. When you give us the chance to become people worthy of your love instead of writing us off as irredeemable, Mom finishes. We sit in comfortable silence, processing the weight of what we've accomplished together. We've built something unprecedented, a family relationship based on intention rather than assumption, accountability rather than entitlement, growth rather than stagnation. Whatever Dr. Martinez recommends, I say finally, I want you all to know that this has been worth the risk. Not just financially, but emotionally. I'm glad I chose to see if change was possible instead of assuming it wasn't. Even if we disappoint. You again? Marcus asks. Even then. Because now I know that disappointment won't destroy me. I know I can set boundaries, enforce consequences, and protect my own well-being while still remaining open to relationship. That's the difference, Dad observes. Before, loving us felt dangerous because you had no power to protect yourself if we hurt you. Now you know you can love us and still maintain your safety. And we know that earning your love requires us. To be worthy of it, Mom adds. Not perfect, but consistently working to become better people, which makes the love we're building more valuable than anything we had before. Marcus concludes, as evening settles around us, we remain the living. Room talking about plans for the foundation, updates on construction projects, and the small daily details that make up a shared life. We're not the family that was broken 16 years ago. We're a new family, built intentionally from the pieces of our collective transformation. And for the first time in my adult life, when I think about family, I don't think about abandonment or conditional love or the fear of being thrown away. I think about people who choose me every day and who I choose back. I think about love that's earned through actions, not claimed through biology. I think about the possibility that families can be built, not just inherited. It's not the ending I expected to my story of abandonment and survival, but it might be the only ending that would have been worth the journey it took to reach it. The foundation charter hangs in a place of honor in my office, but it represents more than just another business venture. It represents the transformation of our family's legacy from abandonment to advocacy. 1 year after my parents and brother showed up at my door with suitcases and desperation, we're gathered around the conference table for the official launch of the Mitchell Foundation's third youth shelter, the Sarah Mitchell Center for Youth Independence. Dad reads from the dedication plaque, his voice thick with emotion. Named in honor of a daughter who survived abandonment and chose to transform her pain into purpose. I'd been surprised when they'd suggested naming the shelter after me. We'd agreed early in our foundation work that this wasn't about ego or recognition. It was about creating sustainable support systems for kids who'd been failed by their families. But Mom had argued that my story needed to be told, that the teenagers we serve needed to see proof that survival was possible. How many kids will this facility serve? Asks Maria Santos, the social worker who's become our primary community partner. 42 at capacity, Marcus responds, consulting his notes. Private rooms for each resident, shared common areas, educational facilities, and job training workshops. And the average length of stay? 18 months, I answer. Long enough to finish high school or get their GED, develop job skills, and save enough money for independent housing. What makes this different from other transitional housing programs? asks David Chun, the city councilman who'd helped us navigate the permitting process. Mom leans forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who's learned to speak truth instead of managing perceptions. What makes this different is that it's run by people who understand what these kids have been through. Not just professionally, but personally. How? So? Because our family knows what it means to fail children who depend on you, Dad says simply. And we know what it takes to rebuild trust, accountability, and functional relationships from that kind of damage. It's become our family's calling card, the willingness to acknowledge our failures as qualification for helping others avoid similar damage. The teenagers we work with respond to this honesty in ways they never respond to professional sympathy or clinical detachment. Tell them about the mentorship program, I suggest to Marcus. Each resident is paired with a volunteer mentor who successfully transitioned from similar circumstances, Marcus explains. Adults who were homeless as teenagers, who aged out of foster care, who were abandoned by their families. People who can say, I survived this, and so can you, with complete authenticity. And the family reconciliation component? Maria asks. Optional and carefully managed, I answer. Some of these kids have families who might be capable of growth and change. Others have families who will never be safe to reconcile with. We help each individual figure out which situation they're in and how to proceed accordingly. How do you make that determination? Dad speaks up. The same way our family figured it out. Through therapy, accountability measures, and demonstrated change over time. Some families are worth the effort to rebuild. Others are too damaged or too dangerous. The kids need help distinguishing between the two. And if reconciliation isn't possible, then we help them build chosen families. Mom says networks of support that provide what their biological families couldn't or wouldn't provide. I watch my parents and brother field these questions with competence and compassion, and I'm struck by how completely they've embraced this work. It's not just a business venture for them, it's become their way of making amends for the damage they caused. What's the long-term vision? David asks. 10 facilities over the next 5 years, I respond. Each one serving a different population, teenagers aging out of foster care, kids who've been kicked out for being LGBTQ, young adults living abusive situations. We want to create a comprehensive network of support that ensures no kid has to sleep on the streets because their family failed them. And the funding model? Mixed sources, private donations, government contracts, revenue from our construction company, and earnings from my other business ventures. We're building this to be sustainable long-term, not dependent on the whims of grant cycles or political changes. Speaking of the construction company, Maria says, I heard you're expanding into affordable housing development. Marcus nods proudly. Mitchell and Associates is partnering with 3 other organizations to build transitional housing for young adults who've completed our shelter programs. Rent-to-own properties that help them build equity while they establish their careers. It's vertical integration, Dad explains. We provide emergency shelter, transitional housing, job training, and permanent housing solutions. A complete pipeline from crisis to stability. And it's profitable, I add, which means we can reinvest the earnings into serving more people instead of depending entirely on charitable donations. As the meeting concludes and our guests file out, I remain in the conference room with my family, looking at the architectural plans and population projections spread across the table. A year ago, we were strangers living under the same roof, bound by desperation and guilt. Now we're partners in something that might actually change the world for kids like I once was. I have something to show you, I say, pulling out a letter. That arrived this morning. What is it? Mom asks. A letter from Jessica Rodriguez. She was one of our first residents at the original shelter. I read aloud. Dear Ms. Mitchell and family, I wanted you to know that I graduated from community college last week with a degree in social work. I start my job with the County Child Services Department next month. None of this would have been possible without the safety and support you provided when I had nowhere else to go. But more than that, you showed me that family doesn't have to be the people who share your DN. It can be the people who choose to show up for you when you need them most. Thank you for showing up for me. I plan to spend my career showing up for other kids who need someone to believe in them. The room falls silent, except for the sound of Mom quietly crying, the good kind of tears this time, tears of joy rather than regret. How many letters like that have we gotten? Marcus asks. 47, I answer. From kids who've transitioned. Successfully, who've found stable housing, who've started college or careers or families of their own. And that's just from our first facility, Dad points out. Imagine what the numbers will look like in 5 years, Mom says. Hundreds of kids who got the support they needed instead of being thrown away. Thousands, I correct. And not just the kids we serve directly, but the kids they'll help as they become teachers, social workers, counselors, and parents who know better than to abandon their children. Generational change, Marcus observes. The opposite of generational. Trauma, I agree. Dad gathers up the plans and reports with the careful attention he's learned to give to important documents. You know what strikes me about all this? What? A year ago, I thought losing the construction business was the worst thing that could happen to our family. But if we hadn't lost everything, we never would have been forced to confront what we'd done to you. And if we hadn't confronted that, none of this would exist. Are you saying you're glad you lost everything? Mom asks. I'm saying I'm glad we found something better to build with the pieces. I stand up and walk to the window, looking out at the city where I once wandered as a homeless teenager, wondering if anyone would ever choose to care about my welfare. Now that same city is dotted with buildings that bear our family name not, as monuments to our wealth, but as promises to kids who need to know that survival is possible. There's something else, I say, turning back to my family. Something I've been thinking about since Dr. Martinez cleared us for independent family. Functioning? What's that? Marcus asks. I want to adopt a teenager. Someone who's aging out of the foster system with nowhere to go. The words hang in the air like a proposal that will change everything, because that's exactly what it is. You want to become a parent? Mom asks. I want to become family to someone who needs it. The way you became family to me again, despite everything that happened between us. That's a big decision, Dad says carefully. It's the right decision. I have the resources, the stability, and now I have the support system of a functional family. Most importantly, I have the experience of knowing what it means to be thrown away and what it takes to rebuild from that damage. What would you need from us? Mom asks. I need you to be grandparents. Or pseudo-grandparents. I need you to help me provide this kid with the kind of family stability that none of us learned as children, but all of us have worked to create as adults. A chance to get it right this time, Marcus says quietly. A chance to be the family we should have been all along. I agree. Dad walks over to the window beside me, both of us looking out at the city that's become our shared project of redemption. What kind of teenager are you thinking about? He asks. Smart but struggling. Someone who's been written off by systems that couldn't see their potential. Someone who needs opportunity more than charity, partnership more than pity. Someone like you were. Someone like I was. But with one crucial difference, they won't have to do it alone. Because they'll have us, Mom says. Because they'll have us, I confirm. All of us. A family that's learned how to choose each other instead of just being stuck with each other. As we pack up our materials and prepare to leave the office, I think about the letter from Jessica Rodriguez, about the 46 other letters like it, about the hundreds of kids who will benefit from the centers we're building. But mostly I think about the teenager I'll soon be welcoming into our imperfect, but intentional family a kid who will never have to wonder if they're worth fighting for. Because we'll make sure they know every single day that they are. The scared 16-year-old who once stood on doorsteps begging for shelter couldn't have imagined this ending to her story. She couldn't have envisioned a future where her abandonment became the foundation for helping others avoid the same fate, where her family's dysfunction became the catalyst for building something functional and beautiful. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the best kinds of transformation happen when we stop trying to go back to what was broken and start building something entirely new from what we learned in the breaking. We threw ourselves away once. Now we spend our lives making, Sure, no other kid has to experience that kind of abandonment. And in the process, we've discovered that sometimes the family you build is stronger than the family you inherit, especially when you build it on a foundation of choice, accountability, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving what shouldn't have been survivable. This is what redemption looks like, not the erasure of past mistakes, but the transformation of those mistakes into something that serves a purpose larger than our own comfort. This is what family looks like, not perfect people bound by biology, but imperfect people bound by commitment to each other's growth and well-being. And this is what home looks like, not a place where you're accepted despite your flaws, but a place where your flaws are acknowledged honestly and your growth is supported unconditionally. We started as a family that threw people away. We've become a family that makes sure no one has to be thrown away again. That transformation, that choice to become something better than what we were, that's the real inheritance. I'm leaving for the teenager who will soon call us family. And maybe, just maybe, it's enough